Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to test my microphone to make sure everybody could hear.
Yes, I can hear you
Pretty
and see
good.
you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Could I grab a sound check?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Eric Blank, the chair of the commission. We're now on the record. It's 1 p.m. on February 2nd, 2026, and this is the commissioner's information meeting and proceeding number 26M-0037E, where the commission is conducting pre-rulemaking activities to help prepare to issue a formal notice of proposed rulemaking regarding public safety power shutoffs. We'll start with Mr. Kennedy, President of Public Service, and his team to learn more about PSPS preparation, communication, and next steps. We'll follow that with a panel comprised of local government officials. After that, we'll hear sequentially from critical infrastructure perspectives and then impacted utility partners. We'll open it up for commissioner questions and conversations with the panelists after each of the three panels. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank our team for putting together what looks like a great agenda, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. So before we get started, Commissioner Plant, any preliminary remarks?
No preliminary remarks. Thanks everybody for participating, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, would echo that. Thanks to everyone for your time today and your expertise, and really look forward to learning today, especially to consider how we can all best coordinate to move forward for the best service for all the customers. So thank you.
Thank you both. Mr. Felder or Ms. Bott, any preliminary comments or guidance before we jump into it? Ms. Bott?
Thank you, Commissioner. No other further comments. Just really excited to hear from everyone today.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Kenny, you want to get us going with your team? I have 20 minutes roughly. So fire away, sir.
Well, first, thank you very much. I don't know. My understanding was somebody from the PUC was going to run our slides. Is that correct?
No, I had heard that I just needed to know from you all who was going to run them, and I'd make them a co-host.
Tyler Mansholt will be our co-host then, if you don't mind, please. And while you do that, let me just start by saying, first of all, let me introduce the team that's with me, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am joined by Gil Salazar, who is our Regional Vice President of Distribution Operations, Paul McGregor, who is our Vice President of Wildfire Risk Mitigation, Andrew Holder, who is our Director of External Affairs and Local Governmental Affairs, and Tyler Mansholt, who is one of our Assistant General Counsel. Did I miss anybody? All right, thank you. Let's leave that slide up for now. I will start by saying again, thank you for the opportunity to be here and giving us the chance to talk about our approach to wildfire mitigation. I think, as everybody knows, we're here to primarily talk about the December 17th and 19th event, but I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that the same weather dynamics that created the conditions that led to the PSPS events in December also led to another more limited PSPS in the northern Colorado Front Range area in January. We were able to apply lessons that we learned from the December event and apply those to the January event. It was a smaller event in scope, and we were able to, in that situation, get most of our customers restored within a day. These downslope, and the main takeaway from that is that these downslope weather events, combined with historically low snowpack, those continue to persist. And that means that we have to remain vigilant and ready to respond if wildfire risk appears again. This is a year-round risk, and so we have to remain prepared and vigilant at every turn. Second slide, please. So again, I want to leave ample time for questions. So I do have a set of slides that I'll go through, but I want to go through them quickly and leave time for questions. But there are 4 things that we really want to make sure we come away with today. We remain convinced that we made the right operational decision for public safety by conducting the PSPS events in December. Second thing I want this audience to know is that we're making significant investments and improvements in our wildfire mitigation capabilities so that we can continue to get better. And third, part of that includes incorporating the lessons that we've learned from PSPS events and from customer feedback to ensure that we're better supporting our customers and our communities. And then lastly, the fourth thing is that we're taking steps going forward to reduce the time, scope, and impact of future PSPS events. Next slide, please. So what I would like to cover today is the PSPS program itself and how it has improved since April of 2024. That windstorm was our first time having to conduct a PSPS. I'm also going to discuss the timeline of how the December events unfolded, including our communications and restoration process. The timeline will illustrate and show the complexity of that windstorm and how it doesn't always align with any fixed schedule because the weather conditions that drive wildfire risk are inherently dynamic and unpredictable. And again, I'm joined by colleagues who will be able to help field questions that you might have. Next slide, please. So a PSPS is a mitigation that we use sparingly and judiciously, and we use it only when the most extreme weather conditions persist and exist. Other utilities are using this as a temporary measure to shut off power during the most extreme weather conditions, which we know are either associated with the high degree that an ignition will happen, and that if an ignition happens, it will propagate very quickly. We consider several objective criteria, including the forecasted extreme winds, low relative humidity, and dry fuel on the ground. When these 3 conditions indicate critical or extreme fire weather, where an ignition of any kind could result in a catastrophic wildfire, we may initiate a PSPS to protect public safety. We only implement that when the other tools that we have in our toolbox by themselves are not enough. And this means that the other mitigation measures, such as system resiliency, veg management, operational adjustments that we're making to our infrastructure, like EPSS, have already been considered and deemed insufficient to manage the risk. Next slide, please. We spent a lot of time learning from the April 2024 event based upon our own internal after actions and a lot of feedback that we heard from customers, communities, including this commission. And we've significantly strengthened and formalized our PSPS program to improve the decision-making process, our coordination, and our communication. We've implemented a standardized incident command system, or ICS structure, to ensure that there's clear leadership, defined roles, and efficient coordination. The ICS structure is used throughout emergency management, both at the state and federal levels, and it's been adopted by many of our company peers around the country. Specifically for a PSPS event, the ICS structure allows us to enhance our communication between the company, offices of emergency management, and impacted local governmental bodies and cities, because it provides defined channels for collaboration both before, during, and after the event itself. Also, since 2024, we've expanded our wildfire team and we've added subject matter experts in meteorology, fire science, and risk management. This expanded structure allows for more continuous monitoring of the conditions, which then allows for faster internal alignment as we make decisions. We've upgraded our communication tools and protocols to improve the timeliness, accuracy, and consistency of information provided to communities, our local governments, offices of emergency management, and other external partners. And I want to just add here, I don't want to leave this audience with the impression that we think we've improved to the point where there's not more room for improvement. We know that there's room for improvement, and we know that. We've heard that loud and clear, and we know that that's an area of opportunity for us. We've significantly improved our risk assessment capabilities since April of 24 with greater enhanced modeling and data integration that allows us to better evaluate weather forecasts, fuel conditions, and the vulnerability of our assets. These improvements allow for a more targeted approach to PSPS, and we'll continue to refine that for an even more targeted and smaller scope. We've established a dedicated wildfire command center, which serves as our centralized operational location during high risk periods, where our wildfire teams, our operational teams, and others that are critically involved meet to integrate meteorology, system operations, communications, data and fire science, and our risk mitigation for the most effective coordinated response. And with the support of this commission, we've accelerated our investments in system resiliency, including pole replacements, covered conductor, sectionalizing devices, and enhanced inspection cycles to improve our overall program. And these investments will reduce the potential for ignition or failure. And all of these taken together will allow us to be able to be more surgical and targeted in the implementation of a PSPS. Next slide, please. So the reality is that we're going to see more severe conditions and drier conditions, and that wildfires and wildfire season is no longer just a season, it's a year-round threat, even in areas where it hasn't typically been common. Some areas of the state are now experiencing 50 additional fire weather days each year compared to the 70s. And we all know that protecting our communities from the dangers of wildfire is the right thing to do. It's something we've talked at length about with policymakers, including this commission. Our goal is to drive grid resiliency and to ensure that there are no catastrophic wildfires in Colorado. And our system is very resilient. We deliver 99.97% reliability for our customers across the state. And when we see the potential for power outages, whether that's due to PSPS or severe weather, we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to communicate with our customers as early as possible. The reliability is an achievement we are proud of, and it's a result of hard work done by our teams. And the investments that we've been making in our 25 to 27 WMP are helping us to achieve that. And so just a couple of things a couple of statistics for people to be aware of what we've done for this year in particular. In this year, we've inspected nearly 50,000 poles to understand if any upgrades or replacements are necessary. Those inspections have led to the repair of 8,400 poles and the replacement of more than 10,000 poles. We are achieving 108% of our veg management goals. We're making operational mitigations, not just PSPS, but enhanced power line safety settings in our medium and high wildfire risk areas. And then we're enhancing our situational awareness by installing 80 new AI cameras and 102 new weather stations. And then on top of all that, we're incorporating advanced software to support our growing meteorology teams and our wildfire risk assessment teams in the work that they do. And then you'll note there our partnerships with the Red Cross and with PBS. We're working to educate and support our customers and communities as we manage the increased risk of wildfires by keeping them informed about the work that we're doing. All right, now next slide. And with that, we know that we're always needing to do better to support our customers. So we talked about the steps that we're taking to reduce the time, scope, and impact of future PSPS events. And we're doing this by deploying additional sectionalizing devices between now and the end of 2027. So during a PSPS event, we turn off power to segments that pose wildfire risk. By adding additional sectionalizing devices, we will help ensure that our electric system will be broken into smaller segments. This will allow both PSPS and EPSS outages to be more surgical, closely targeted, and should allow us to limit the scope and the potential duration of future events. This will allow our events to just be smaller in scope, but also allow us to restore more quickly. We're also continuing to underground lines. We've gotten a lot of questions about the undergrounding of lines. It is a tool that's in our toolbox, and our plan does include undergrounding of 50 miles of 6 different distribution lines in high fire risk areas. This can be a complex process, and what we want folks to know is that while we will continue to look at targeted undergrounding, it can be especially challenging in terrain such as mountainous areas or areas where it's difficult to attain to get to. And depending on the specific electric line, the cost per mile in the distribution system can be up to 4 times as much as overhead lines, up to 10 times greater at the transmission level. So we want to make sure that we're making decisions about undergrounding that are cost effective while delivering the greatest possible reduction to wildfire risk. So I'll also add that as a part of being able to restore customers quickly, we are stationing crews in strategical locations before a PSPS or before a severe weather event so that they can begin restoring power as quickly as the weather has cleared and it's safe for them to go into the field. And just a note here, I know there is confusion, so to speak, that as soon as the wind event clears, that we will be able to start restoring power immediately. We can't start restoring power until we've examined the infrastructure to make sure that we're not energizing a line that's been damaged. And so we do pre-position crews so that we can move more quickly. But power restoration may take hours or days because of that visual inspection process that has to happen. And it's not just humans that we're using. We are using drones. We're using helicopters. And again, those can't fly until the weather has cleared. We're also evaluating the use of other technology to automate these patrols. And the technology that we're using or that we're evaluating right now, in conjunction with human patrols, we believe could potentially reduce the duration of those patrols by up to 50%. Let me just move to the next slide with the timeline of events. This slide here is intended to indicate the execution timeline for the December wind event, which ultimately resulted in 2 separate events. So the 17th and the 19th separated by the 18th in between. Because of the capabilities of our meteorology and risk assessment teams, we were able to begin monitoring this weather system as early as December 12th, when conditions initially indicated extreme risk. But the weather conditions, as we know, are dynamic, and they evolved rapidly and became more complex as the event got closer to the 17th. So the timeline here illustrates the 5 operational stages beginning up to 10 days prior to the potential event. While this framework does reflect our ideal planning horizon, the reality is that weather systems don't always develop in a predictable manner. In fact, more often than not, they're not going to. But in the December wind event, multiple weather systems converged at different times. And for the second de-energization, our planning horizon effectively began in stage 3 rather than in the earlier stage. So the next slide presents the December 2025 wind event in a slightly different format. It highlights the time horizon that we were able to provide based on our internal forecasting and our internal risk assessment, alongside the National Weather Service's event horizon, which is reflected in the bottom of that slide. This comparison also shows how our internal monitoring and modeling allowed us to identify areas of concern and to begin preparations in advance of formal weather alerts. And at the same time, it demonstrates how external forecasts continue to evolve as the event approached. In this case, the National Weather Service ultimately issued what they call a particularly dangerous situation. This is a term of art. It's a type of red flag warning And that was for the December 19th event, but they issued that on the evening of the 18th, which reflects that there was a rapid escalation of the fire weather conditions with wind speeds exceeding hurricane force and extremely low relative humidity. And it's important also to note that this was the first time that the PDS was ever issued for a fire weather warning in Colorado. And for further context, the PDS, particularly dangerous situation, these were the same weather conditions that California was seeing in Southern California just prior to the Palisades and Eaton fires. Next slide, please. So the next two slides get into more particulars with respect to both the 17th and 8th and 19th events, and shows the initial scoping of the events on the 17th and the 19th, along with the final de-energization. They illustrate that the scale and complexity of these wind events, including the significant number of transmission lines and distribution lines that were impacted. And again, I mentioned this earlier, each of the lines and feeders must be physically inspected and verified safe before power can be restored. This process is essential because, as you know, we got to make sure there's no damage, debris, or that a hazardous condition exists that could then create the very risk that we were looking to mitigate. And because of this, the restoration timelines are not driven solely by improving weather conditions, but also by the time required to complete a thorough, safety-focused inspection of any de-energized or damaged facilities. 11, please. I think did we do 10 and 11? So 10 shows the 17th and 11 shows the 19th. I think the other thing is that we got a lot of feedback about the initial scope being much larger than the ultimate de-energized scope. And I think we're balancing the need to give our customers as much advance notice with the information that we have at that time. We're balancing that with a desire not to overscope or not to over communicate such that we provide panic or scare people. But we've heard a lot of feedback about a desire to be notified earlier than not. And that's the balance that we're trying to strike. Slide 12, please. So speaking of communications, this slide outlines our standard public PSPS communications framework and intended notification timelines prior to a PSPS. This framework obviously is based upon industry standards, but it's also intended, as we will note, to demonstrate the improvements that we realized from the April 24 event to December 25. And it's designed to make sure that we're giving clear information to both our customers and our emergency partners. As I mentioned earlier, weather systems don't follow predictable timelines. In fact, they will not always follow predictable timelines. And in those situations, our communications need to be adjusted in real time to reflect real-time evolution of those conditions. So to support communities in preparing for an outage, early notification may sometimes include a broader geographic area than is ultimately impacted. And we know that this can cause additional confusion. We're consistently doing that balance between preparedness and the evolution of the conditions. And it's also important to recognize that rapidly changing circumstances may sometimes affect the areas even beyond those that we initially expected to be impacted. Regardless of the ultimate result, we want to make sure that we're providing the best information that we have as early as possible to support public safety. Next slide, please. Again, continuous improvement is something that we're committed to, and we're continuously taking the lessons that we learned from prior events and incorporating that along with customer feedback to make sure that our processes during PSPS run smoothly. The lessons that we learned from April of 24, in addition to our wildfire mitigation investments, in addition to benchmarking that we've done with peer utilities, have allowed us to respond more quickly and act decisively in December. On communicating with customers for the December 17th and 19th event, we issued a total of 88 different customer and public communication touch points, which included outbound calls, emails, text messages, as well as news releases, social media posts, website updates, and press conferences. We provided advance notice with the first of those communications being shared on December 14th, as well as providing Spanish language translation for these materials. Our OEM, our Offices of Emergency Management Coordination, evolved from individualized calls to 3 time a day frequent conference calls beginning at the 72-hour mark. Critical medical customers and facilities were notified 63 hours prior. And on top of that, additionally, we had 151 critical customers were identified using a new structured process so that we could enhance that support. On an operational level, the strategic investments that we're making in system hardening through our overhead pole assessments and pole replacements and line builds also resulted in less materials needing to be replaced and reduced the storm damage impact financially as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about restoration. Next slide. You got it? There we go. So again, I want to make sure that everybody understands that our process of PSPS restoration and any restoration is governed first by safety, and that's safety to our customers and communities, and also safety to our coworkers that are out in the field having to do this work. The weather being clear, that makes us able to actually go out and begin the process of assessment, but it doesn't mean that power is restored immediately upon the weather being cleared. So restoration will begin when it's safe for our crews in the field to be able to go do that. Our process doesn't allow weather restoration until weather safe evaluation has been completed. And then once conditions allow, our teams do conduct a systemic inspection of de-energized lines and equipment to identify any damage or hazards that have occurred. Circuits are prioritized for restoration based upon impacts to critical infrastructure, such as hospitals, emergency services, and water systems. And then our restoration follows a systematic approach, and power is only restored after we've done all the inspections and safety protocols. The next 3 slides are going to illustrate the actual damage that we saw. And I think this is important for a couple of reasons. You can never prove a negative, and I said this before, but it does give illustrative evidence of what could have happened in the event that we hadn't de-energized in these locations. The image and the data shown on the right demonstrates how a fire would have propagated under extreme weather conditions if those damaged facilities had remained energized. And that's additional analysis that we're able to do through the software that we have. These examples really are able to underscore the real and immediate impact and risk to human life, structures, commercial buildings, and community infrastructure. They also show the risk posed by damaged equipment during any extreme weather event. So this one shows a transmission static line damage, which also shows a scenario in which a rapidly spreading fire was possible had this line remained energized. The highlighted area demonstrates how quickly flames could have reached nearby structures and populated areas. And in this situation, in this scenario, the fire could have grown to 4,300 acres within 8 hours, with the potential to have destroyed 339 structures and place an estimated 419 people at risk of injury or loss of life. And this is our initial attack assessment of 5. And what that means is that a fire would be very difficult to get to and contain. The terrain and high winds means that firefighting crews might not have been able to respond quickly or be able to have effectively contained that fire. The FBI, or Fire Behavior Index, of 5 means that a fire would move very quickly and burn very hot. So fire crews would only be able to create fire breaks or use planes or helicopters to fight that fire, which makes containment much more challenging. The next slide. This one is a distribution pole failure. And our simulations here indicate that a fire could have spread to roughly 2,500 acres, potentially threatening 12 structures and putting 29 lives at risk. And then next one, please. This is another distribution pole failure that's shown on this slide, where simulations indicated potential fire spread of roughly 2,100 acres, 610 structures impacted, and 1,750 people at risk. We share this, again, as it's illustrative of the very real risks associated with ignitions and associated with what can happen if that equipment fails during an extreme weather event. So the December event, we know that these potentially catastrophic fires from equipment failure were avoided, and there were no ignitions of consequence, reflecting the effectiveness of our mitigation efforts. All right, I'm going to wrap up here. I want to wrap up, we consider a range of objective criteria when we make the decision to execute a PSPS, including wind, low relative humidity, and low fuel moisture. We know that our communities experience these conditions in December with more than 100-mile-per-hour winds. In addition to the recent drought conditions that we've all observed and unusually warm temperatures, which we're all seeing. Just at the end of the day, I want our customers and communities and this commission to know that we prioritize public safety first and foremost. And that's why we use this tool as a way of protecting lives from the risk of wildfire ignitions. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions that the commission might have.
Mr. Kenny, are you able to stick around for a while? I'm thinking that maybe
I'm staying till the end.
Okay,
I will be
thank
here
you.
until the last person speaks.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm thinking we'll go to the next panel, hear from the local governments, and then have a general conversation. With that work for you, Commissioner Plant and Commissioner Goman? Yeah, okay. And thanks for your willingness to stick with us. Let's go to the local government panel. I have 6 speakers. We have about 30 minutes. If you can all keep it to about 5 minutes, that'd be great. And then we'll have a conversation with the government officials and the company. So I have Mike Chard, OEM from Boulder first, if you're out there. Mr. Chard, 5 minutes. It's 1:30.
All right, sound check. Can you hear me, sir?
We can.
All right, don't know if you can see me, so we'll get started. Thanks for the opportunity to share some impacts, what happened during this event. Just to kind of highlight something really quick is that when we look at this PSPS, as I said on Friday at a legislative hearing, this is really a high wind event that creates impacts. And the impacts, obviously, one being a PSPS, but also some of the other things that did happen in our community, the sort of size and scale. There's a lot more, I guess, in detail here, but we lost power not just to the PSPS, but also had substantial damage to our a grid across unincorporated areas and multiple municipalities in Boulder County. We had physical damage to some structures, economic impacts, I can't underscore that enough, to businesses and commerce, transportation infrastructure with road closures from Highway 93, Highway 36, various roads that had down power lines that made them impassable across those roadways. We had our Justice Center going on generator with 3 high-profile trials happening. If they would have lost power, that would have been tremendous impacts. Medical, congregate care centers on generators, closed open space trails, school districts, higher learning centers were closing, water, sewer infrastructure were on generators or were out of service, telecommunications infrastructure degraded, such as the cell service in dense areas or even outages in our mountain areas, preventing us from being able to do 911 communications, significant vegetation debris across the high wind zones. Even, we just can't have a PSPS. We had to have an overturned propane truck up in Allens Park. That was another problem, and luckily that did not turn into a significant hazmat or fire event. Many community events had to be moved. Lifestyle impacts on over 50,000 people for more than a couple of days. And of course, the most vulnerable in our community felt these impacts usually first, and protracted impacts as resources are scarce to assist with their recovery or simply getting them back on their feet. And of course, we heard a lot of, impacts from people with food and sort of other personal things. When I say that, though, there's 4 phases to these PSPSs, one being the pre-incident phase, as we start to talk about all the notifications, getting those on time. I think that this started, I know it started for me on the Saturday before when I got a phone call that night that we might be doing this. I brought our coordination structures together on that Sunday, the 15th. We were in multiple meetings all the way through and to the end on the 21st. I want to go ahead, just kind of move off of that, though, and talk about of those impacts and then the things that we did in our operational meeting with Xcel. I see there's 2 sides. This one is community impacts and then the operational impacts around these events. When we talk about the after action work, the first thing that came up with is sort of that decision making around when these PSPSs occurred. We had a no go decision on this at 6 a.m. on the day of the power shutdown, and that was 4 hours prior to having the actual switch thrown on this and having power go down. There's two conflicting attempts here. One is that they're trying to make the decision at the last possible moment while we're trying to make the decision as early as we can to communicate out preparedness work. I think that we talked about pre-established polygons. Looking at this event, it was very significant. And I know there's some technology around that and science that I'm not aware of, but if we could somehow get to a point where we took our worst case scenario like this most recent one and said these are the polygon or the areas that are going to be out, and we started there as opposed to 500,000 people, that would be a huge advantage. So we could start focusing our saturation preparedness work prior to the events and also be able to start communicating in a more robust way so people could start taking protective measures. The messaging to the community, we got to be better at. I think that for my policy side, we've got some work to do there also, where we like to, let Xcel take the lead on that as we lead into the event. And then as the event happens, we then start moving with it and doing more overlaying on the messaging, but some sort of joint information system. And we're working with Xcel to see how we can leverage that and make that better. And I know I'm running out of time here, so I just want to go into the last thing here is the response and restoration coordination and command interface. There needs to be more than a liaison relationship. There needs to be more direct one-on-one with the command and control elements of Xcel. And to give you an example of what that might mean, in restoration, we actually had 2 fires in our county. We don't know if they were caused by a power line being re-energized, but there is reason to believe there may be an opportunity for that to happen. So it highlighted the important need of during restoration, 6 requirements need to occur that will be adjusted in our plan. One is I need to know from Xcel the exact feeder that's being re-energized and time, location, whether or not that's been actually inspected every linear foot or not. I need to be able to notify a fire department, let them have time to be able to evaluate fire risk and develop staffing and response plans. 3, check in with my 911 center for status of our alert and warning system if something were to happen that we could move people. 4, let my law enforcement agency have time to consider evacuations and do they need to get out there and maybe even do some messaging around that. 5, I need to have my joint information system start messaging the area that's being restored. And lastly, once all those conditions are met, feed an approval back to their command control area and have them turn on the power once and only those 6 conditions or 5 conditions have been met. So we've got a few more other things that I could go on, but I'm at time, and I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to briefly kind of share some of the impacts that we've had and some of the learnings that we have going forward. We will have a plan being adjusted. Happy to submit that to the PUC for a revised version of our current plan that we've submitted up for maybe some improvements within the area. Last thing I want to highlight also, if I may, if Xcel could create the public safety portal they had, was great. We did have better communication. My other peers are going to highlight that. But one thing we came up in our after action was if there was a way to bring up prior events, it would help us in scoping and scale the outage areas that these PSPSs do cause. I could go on for another hour, but I won't. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I end my report, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chard. And when we get to the Q&A, my first question will be on your 3 or 4 areas of potential improvement. Ms. Stoltzman, Boulder County Commissioner, 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Stolzman. I'm a Boulder County Commissioner, and prior to being County Commissioner, I was the mayor of Louisville during the Marshall Fire. And so in our county, we know all too well about the reality of the devastation that we can have from wildfire and urban conflagration in our community. And so first and foremost, we actually want to acknowledge and thank Xcel for working on the public safety power shutoff. We believe that's an effective tool to protect against wildfire, and we have some ideas on how we can work to improve it going forward. We really would like to start also by thanking the fire districts, the first responders, the city governments, the Office of Disaster Management. You just heard from Mike there. They really work together to support and protect the community during different types of emergencies and events. And it was no different during the public safety power shutoff from this wind event, helping community members all throughout. So we believe the public safety power shutoff should be a short-term approach with a larger strategy in place to improve infrastructure in the Front Range. We know that just like California knows there are earthquakes, on the East Coast they know there are hurricanes. We know that there are 120-mile-an-hour wind gusts and they're coming again. We know because of climate change that it's drier and hotter. We know that we're going to have to do this again. So we want to be good partners in working to improve the infrastructure so that the public safety power shutoffs can be minimized to the greatest extent possible. So it's really important for our community to keep working on communication and some other things, and I'll go into those now. There were residents certainly that you heard from, that we heard from, who are really angry, and businesses who are really angry. But there are also a lot of people that we heard from that are very afraid, and both are valid feelings. And so when we think about how we respond to support people, thinking of the most vulnerable people in our community, people who really cannot afford to even lose groceries, you know, if they're already getting government assistance to buy food in the first place, like losing groceries creates a incredible hardship. So really thinking through who is the most vulnerable, who needs some support in times like these, that's something that's critical for our community. And we want to think about ensuring that we're not duplicating benefits. I'm happy to talk more about that, but like if Medicaid is covering the cost of a battery for your medical devices, we don't need to be doing that also. We can make sure you're connected with the resource. If there's already a resource for stop loss insurance for a business, we don't need to cover that also. So really making sure that we're not duplicating benefits, but supporting the most vulnerable in times like this is a critical thing. We want to thank the crews that work to turn the power back on. And in the communication piece, it's really important to help folks understand that they need to visually inspect all the lines. Fire crews in our department, as you heard from Mike Chard, are really concerned that on the re-energizing of the system, we had a couple of fires come out. And you know, the wind was still 30 miles an hour. So we want to make sure that the teams that are out there inspecting the lines have the support from the broader community to do it by the book, inspect every line, and make sure that we're not starting fires by mistake when re-energizing. So even though it may seem that the event is over, it's critical that we take the time that's needed to ensure we're not starting fires and creating emergencies on the tail end of a wind event. I want to just absolutely acknowledge that Xcel improved communications this year with the shutoff over the previous shutoff. We saw a big improvement there, and there's still some area for more improved coordination and communication on our part and their part that we can work on together. One area we've identified and want to talk about today is about people who have a power company, but they don't actually get the bill. So 30% of Boulder County residents are renters. They may not all get the bill. They may not all get the sign-up notification, and that's an area where we can do better. And the last part, this may seem odd, but a lot of people were very confused by unplanned outages. So they may not have been part of the public safety power shutoff, but then a tree came and knocked out the line and now their power's out. So there was a lot of confusion about unplanned power outages that could be improved in the communication. So in summary, we support the public safety power shutoffs in our community. We want to work on the infrastructure together to minimize them to the greatest extent possible, and we'd like to work together on communication and hardening. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us and appreciate your perspective on this. Really helpful. Mr. Whittington, OEM Jefferson County, 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Make sure y'all can hear me.
We can.
All right. I'll skip all the pomp and circumstance. Thank you for the time. What was your experience? You guys broke it out into the questions that the PUC really wanted to try to get to an answer to. So what was your experience during the PSPS events in December? Jefferson County experienced 2 overlapping PSPS events beginning on December 17th, resulting in prolonged outages for foothill and mountain communities, with some residents affected by continuously for up to 7 days. County OEM began monitoring on the 14th, went to a partial activation on the 17th, and then a full activation on the 19th, reflecting the extended duration and cascading impacts of the events. Awareness of PSPS possibility. Yes, the county was generally aware of the potential for a PSPS during the high fire risk weather conditions, consistent with statewide preparedness messaging and prior utility outreach. However, awareness of a possibility did not equate to clarity on scope, duration, or compounding impacts from the consecutive PSPS events, which Director Chard already talked about. Consistency with PCSO timelines, Section 3 of the PSPS plan. Some elements of the plan timeline align conceptually, including advance notice or elevated fire conditions. In practice, restoration timelines and outages boundaries evolved significantly, particularly following infrastructure damage resulting in longer than anticipated in certain communities. Notification of scope of impacts. Notifications occurred through a combination of utility communication, state coordination channels, and regional coordination channels and situational awareness updates. Customer impact numbers, affected polygons, and restoration estimates were not consistently updated, particularly between the first and second event. Many customers remained without power when the second PSPS event began. Preparedness actions. The county EOC activated staffing, coordinated with our essential support functions, established resource and charging centers, supported sheltering operations, and coordinated with nonprofit and regional partners. Critical infrastructure, water systems, communications, healthcare, corrections, and vulnerable populations were actively monitored and supported. Exercises and training. Jefferson County and regional partners have participated in tabletop and functional exercises involving power outages. However, multi-day consecutive PSPS scenarios with cascading infrastructure failures remain underrepresented in the current exercise design. So what went well? Strong interagency and regional coordination included utility liaison support, effective EOC activation and information sharing cadence from our perspective to our community, successful deployment of resource centers, shelters, potable water, and food preservation assets, timely coordination for assisted living evacuations and vulnerable population support, proactive call diversion efforts to reduce our strain on our 911 that would ultimately impact first responders. What did not go so well? Inconsistent and delayed customer impact data, particularly between the PSPS phases. Extended restoration timelines due to infrastructure damage in difficult terrain. Limited backup power redundancy for communications towers, water systems, and shelters. Challenges reaching property managers and case managers for vulnerable housing populations. Cumulative impacts from back-to-back PS events were not fully anticipated. Recommended changes for future events. Utility support, financially and operationally, for county-level response efforts, including comfort centers, supplies, equipment, and staffing. Break the grid, as Director Chard said, into predefined smaller polygons to allow for more targeted shutoffs. Prioritize and fund critical infrastructure resilient projects in partnership with local OEMs. Expand public-private partnerships to educate and support vulnerable populations, including, as mentioned earlier at the testimony in front of the legislators, the battery program. Improve data consistency, restoration forecasting, and EOC utility coordination. Expand joint PSPS specific training and long-duration outage exercises. So the last thing the PUC requested was material differences identified between their plan and the event that took place in December of 25. Yes, 25. Granularity of impact areas. The PSPS plan from Xcel describes defined shutoff areas. However, in practice, outage footprints were larger and less precise, affecting customers outside of perceived high-risk zone. Restoration timelines. While the plan outlines restoration sequencing and safety checks, actual restoration timelines extended well beyond initial expectations, particularly when infrastructure damage occurred during the first PSPS and carried into the second event. Customer impact updates. The plan emphasizes customer notifications and situational awareness, yet local jurisdictions did not consistently receive updated customer counts or revised estimates, limiting planning accuracy. Cumulative event consideration. The PSPS plan primarily addresses an individual event. The December experience demonstrated that consecutive events created compounding incidents that required different planning assumptions. Critical infrastructure assumptions. The plan acknowledges critical infrastructure prioritization, but the event revealed gaps in backup power, fuel logistics, and ownership clarity, particularly for communication and water systems. Vulnerable population mitigation. While customer outreach is addressed in the plan, outage impacts on senior housing, assisted living facilities, and subsidized community exceeds mitigation assumptions, especially where generators supported or only partial building systems. Local cost absorption. The PSPS plan does not fully account for the financial and staffing burdens placed on county emergency operations, including shelter, resource center, water distribution, call management, and local salaries. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Scott Vargo, City Manager, City of Golden, 5 minutes, sir.
Hello. Thanks very much for inviting me to the hearing this afternoon. I'm Scott Margam, the City Manager serving Golden, Colorado. Our residents and our businesses were impacted heavily by the PSPS events December the 17th through the 20th of this past year. We as a community certainly recognize and appreciate the wildfire risks and the need for mitigation. But at what cost and in what way are those mitigation efforts imposed upon us? Our local chamber estimated business losses were within millions of dollars for the period of time, and resident impacts were, of course, significant as well throughout the course of the event. We were generally aware of the possibility of a PSPS. Xcel did provide notice to the city. There were regional discussions with county and local emergency managers the 15th of December regarding the potential PSPS on the 17th. Initial notice was generally consistent with what I believe is Xcel's plan. However, the final decision on the implementation of the PSPS, when it would start, whom it would impact, came late in the evening on the 16th of December as a, I'll say, unofficial notice to local governments. And then later that the morning of the 17th, public communication went out just a few hours before the event took place. I was informed and really continued to be informed throughout the shutdowns by our Xcel Community and Local Governments Affair representative, and I very much appreciate that connection. They provided status updates. However, the info that was being shared did not always match our reality, and the communications focused heavily on, that were pushed out to the public, focused heavily on the duration of the wind event, rather than a realistic projection to customers of the duration of the outage. Many people were confused, thinking that power would be restored at or shortly after 6 p.m. on the 17th, particularly because heavy winds never materialized within the Golden area, within the city boundaries. We're very experienced with heavy winds here, and a lot of our community was frustrated and confused as to why power wasn't coming back on when they never actually saw power impact or wind impacting them directly. In addition, certain areas within Golden were not ever impacted by the PSPS, despite being told that they were within that power shutoff area. That caused some businesses to close unnecessarily. And then some of those same businesses were told they would not be part of the Friday power shutoff. And many of them subsequently lost power on Friday, apparently not due to the PSPS, but rather to the enhanced power line safety settings, where some event took place that caused those parts of the grid to go down. This included many of our businesses along Washington Avenue, which is Golden's primary downtown business district. It also impacted the Colorado School of Mines and all of the surrounding neighborhoods for the school. When we were asked why the power was on for certain areas on the first shutdown that we expected to be in the shutdown, Xcel was uncertain. They referenced the complicated grid and that some of its feeders lines that were not in the high-risk zone were not shut down. It's concerning to me that the grid is so complicated that Xcel was unable to accurately identify which of its customers would be impacted by the planned shutdown. Our water treatment plant, which is identified as critical infrastructure with Xcel, was shut down. Our police, our fire departments were shut down. Our fleet shops, our fuel islands were shut down. Yet traffic signals, certain restaurants and other businesses less than a block away were not shut down. Our golf course, certainly not critical infrastructure, never lost power in the PSPS, but was included in the original outage maps and was surrounded by entities that were shut down. Our preparations included generator preparation, testing for city facilities, including our water distribution system, heavy communication efforts within the community, at first to supplement Xcel efforts. And when it was found that the info that was being shared was inaccurate or inadequate, we provided consistent scheduled updates at least 3 times per day to our community, sharing information about charging and shelter resources, along with whatever information we were able to gather from Xcel. Communication must be more clear and consistent from Xcel. The focus on the wind event duration and the statements that Xcel would work 24 hours a day to restore power were disingenuous at best. The visual inspection requirement meant that power could not be restored until the following morning because crews couldn't conduct inspections in the dark. And the wind event timeframe went until the evening, into the dark. So any suggestion that power would have been back on the 17th or the 19th was flawed. The outages need to be more targeted. Infrastructure needs to be more resilient in these communities that are so close to or within the WUI zones. Undergrounding lines in these critical areas and critical and more populated areas, simplification and redundancy of the grid to reduce the impact of targeted outages on population centers and critical infrastructure is imperative. And something needs to be done to reduce the amount of time it takes for power to be restored. More cameras, more technology to reduce the on-the-ground visual inspection process, which is also fallible to human neglect or failures. And if the PSPS is the new standard, then Xcel should be providing support to residents and businesses in these areas to purchase backup power systems, to provide charging resources in the affected communities during outages, and to provide financial support for losses of food, inventory, lost sales, and lost work. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate you joining us. Mr. Chris O'Brien, President, Boulder County Firefighter.
Hi, hopefully you can all hear me.
We can.
Thank you. I'm just going to touch, I'm not going to go into depth. I think Director Chard and Commissioner Stolzman did an excellent job of discussing Boulder County's preparedness. And I think a lot of that stems, as Commissioner Stolzman said, to the 2024 PSPS that Boulder County experienced. Really, I want to talk to the effects on the firefighting community. Boulder County was able to, due to the communication between Xcel and our ODM, Director Chard especially, to start getting the messaging out earlier in the incident than we were in 2024 for sure, which gave us a little bit of a head start and a leg up. We were able to get nearly all of the 17 volunteer agencies in Western Boulder County stood up and staffing their stations so that in the event of loss of communications, especially downstream customers from Xcel, including the hardline phone providers, when the power goes out and their backup systems go down because the backup systems aren't designed for multiple days of loss of power, the communities had a way to get a hold of 911 and be able to start to generate a response. So we were prepared for that. I think what the biggest challenges that we faced was not only the messaging, especially for folks with durable medical equipment and durable medical needs, directing them to areas that would not be affected by the power shutdown so that they would be able to continue to use their equipment in an effective manner and designed for the ailments that they have. But also it gave us the opportunity to have communications for the period of the PSPS. One of the big concerns that came back to us, obviously, was the 2 small wildland fires we had during the re-energization process, which are kind of a very conspicuous coincidence. Whether the lines were inspected or not is certainly in question. The agencies that did respond to those incidents did identify that there were power lines on the ground at the site of both of those ignitions. So, again, the investigations aren't complete, but certainly it speaks to while there is a lot of pressure on Xcel after a PSPS to start getting lines re-energized and getting communities back on their feet, we really do need to take that time and considerate process to make sure that those lines are indeed safe to re-energize. And one of the ways that we feel that that can happen is better communication between Xcel and either the Office of Disaster Management, which had stood up our incident management team. So we had the various ESFs working and functional roles. So we could have done a better job with information back and forth between Xcel and the local fire districts. And also, I think in terms of just generally, as Xcel is working in the various fire districts throughout the Front Range and even throughout the state, contacting those fire districts to identify areas of weakness that can be areas of focus then and success for Xcel. So I think those are really the primary comments that we have on behalf of the fire departments. Again, thanks to Xcel for the prior communication with our ODM. It really did make a big difference. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Christopher James, State Emergency Operations Center. 5 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon. Probably can keep it a little shorter than that, but thanks again. So I'm the Deputy Manager at State Emergency Operations Center. And for the sake, not to belittle anybody, but just kind of create context for some of the commissioners that may not know, as a home rule state, our job here at the SEOC is really to support what's going on down in the field, right? So that kind of leads me into, once we have learned of this, we created a small coordination call with our field managers, with Larry Duran, with the PUC there, and a couple of, smaller call with them just to really kind of gain an idea of what potential needs would be out there so we can try to lean forward and plan for that. So with that being said, we were, planning for a multi-day outage from what it sounded like, as well as fire behavior, because that would be our primary, that would be one of our primary things to look out for, minus the PSP with all this high winds. So those would be our two main objectives as we were leading forward there. Then on day 2, which would be Tuesday the 16th, is when we had a larger coordination call with the same audience, as well as additional ESFs to really try to dig into, again, what those possible needs might be. So we were attending we did appreciate all the NWS calls. CDOT did a great job, also, as well as Xcel with the daily briefings and trying to present us with as much information as they can. We had our GIS team linking up with Xcel, CDOT, and some of those other GIS teams when possible to and I know there's an issue with certain information not being able to be shared, and that's something we're continuously trying to work through, but trying to get them. So we had an overlay here to really identify what the potential impacts are and who's going to be impacted by it, obviously with focus being on oh my goodness, my brain just went dead, with vulnerable communities. So during the PSPS, I thought it was great, again, with the constant calls. CDOT was still doing 2 calls a day. Xcel was doing them frequently throughout the day. And NWS was doing them every hour on the hour. So we had a real, to gain that information. So I thought that went fairly well. And then post-recovery, or post-PSPS, it's kind of where we were like, okay, really trying to dig in with ESF8 to say, hey, how are, some of those vulnerable communities, folks that needed medical attention, all that good stuff, how was that working? And they did a great job reaching out and getting that information for us, as they should, which really benefited us and let us know where we can focus, because as we know, there was a fire starting out east at the time too. So really, I think for us, we did recently have a tabletop exercise surrounding this. Some of your folks were there. I thought that was a great event that really brought to light, with having all the people that we had there, brought to light some things we can work on. So from our foxhole here in the SEOC, the coordination and who we coordinate with, and information sharing is obviously, as you've heard today, is really one of the biggest things we can improve on, both ways, us top down and down up. So I think that'd be the biggest takeaway for us here, and then to continue to exercise and reevaluate those plans as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I guess maybe I'll jump in first and then turn it over to my colleagues. And if everybody could, if the panelists wouldn't mind turning on their cameras, that'd be greatly appreciated. And I guess I'll start with you, Mr. Kenny. It sounds like we're improving. We avoided a wildfire. Sounds like we're doing a number of things better. But it sounds like there's also some considerable room for improvement. And I just ask you, instead of focusing on any one issue, can we talk about a process where we get the maybe 10 or 12 concerns we heard here today listed, written up? Maybe our team can help provide the lead on that. And then, Mr. Kenny, how do we get a process and a dialogue and a conversation going among the people on this call, and where we can get answers from the company and just get agreement to the extent we can, what went right, what went wrong, and what we're going to do better in the future? Did you have any guidance for the PUC and this broader community about how we sort of move forward together?
I do. Thank you for the question. And I just also will say a couple of things. Thank you to each of the 6 speakers. And I forgot at the beginning to also acknowledge our first responders that were out in the field doing heroic work at the time. And so I just want to also echo that. I'd say a couple of things. Much of what I'm hearing today is around greater coordination, more transparency around restoration times in particular, greater opportunities for more communication or different types of communication. I would say I don't disagree with any of that. In terms of a process, I will acknowledge that, or I'll just point out that we've done several after action reviews with individual cities between December and today. And I say that just to illustrate, we're absolutely willing to hear the feedback and then incorporate that feedback. In terms of a process specifically here at the commission, I kind of view this commission information meeting as at least a desire to do exactly what you're describing, Chairman Blank, is give us the opportunity to hear that feedback, give you all an opportunity to hear that feedback. In terms of what the process would be for us to incorporate that feedback, we will expect that we will file another updated wildfire mitigation plan at some time in 2027. That doesn't mean we're waiting to implement these things, but I think that's an opportunity to formalize the things that we're hearing. I do think that we expect to have ongoing conversations with our offices of emergency management, both at the county level and at the state level, about how we can strengthen that coordination. I don't think there's very many suggestions that we've heard here that we would take issue with, maybe with the exception of compensation for losses and that thing, and we can talk about that. But in terms of better communication, better coordination, opportunities to have someone embedded in the emergency management, the Office of Emergency Management, all of these are things that we've heard in other venues, and would be happy to continue brainstorming about how we make those things concrete, whether that's incorporated into a wildfire mitigation plan or otherwise. And some of these things are already in the works. I heard very clearly that the polygons that we had, the portal that we had that our offices of emergency management had access to, was much more accurate than the public facing outage maps that our customers saw. We know that, and we know that we need to do work to fix those public facing outage maps. That work is underway. So I'll pause there. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm open to a process that allows us to maybe more formally incorporate this feedback. And at the same time, I don't want there to be this impression that work hasn't already begun. And maybe Andrew might, I don't mean to put people on the spot, but Andrew Holder has been very deeply engaged in all of the after action reviews that we've been doing and will do. And so you might be able to just outline what's already been done, but we don't have to. But the point is that we're not waiting to do these things already.
All right, maybe we can formalize that, somehow list out the problems where we agree, and pointing towards a solution. The other thing I'd add is not just the communications, but also the resiliency of critical infrastructure. We had a lot of comments about 911 being out. Mr. Chard, did you have something to add or response or help us sharpen
Sure.
our thinking?
Yes, sir. Thanks. Real quickly on the process to this, I think what would be helpful is creating an implementation working group. And many times with after action reports, we see this a lot of time in other instances where, you get the people together, we all talk about it, we record what we've got as far as outputs and things to do, but then we don't create the infrastructure to bring people together to work more purposefully on, some sort of process management platform with deadlines, with the right people in the room to be able to have decision-making authority or at least representation there that can move the various improvement areas forward. And I think a lot of things you're seeing too, as we talked, we had 9 counties and a coordination structure that we as emergency managers set up here locally. So I think there's a strong connection with the county emergency managers to be part of that implementation group. And then we just need to set a meeting and cadence structure and start just rolling up the sleeves, getting the work done, getting plans done, agreements in place, whatever that is, and being able to make these movements across the region where we're all going to benefit from them.
Mr. Kenny, Mr. Holder, thoughts on that suggestion, sort of an implementation infrastructure?
I just wrote down the phrase implementation working group and I just said, are we all good with that? I think we find that infinitely reasonable. I don't have any qualms of doing something like that.
Ms. Stoltzman, anything you'd add? Any guidance for how we continued a structured conversation going forward? I have to say, I really appreciated your perspective from the Marshall Fire through the PSPS, where you've now seen both sides of it. So any guidance, comments,
I
thoughts?
support what Mike Chard says.
I think I've heard that a lot over the last year. Commissioner Plant, questions? Well, let me just ask our team, Ms. O'Neill, Ms. Bott, any thoughts on the role we could play in helping lead this, maybe not lead it forward, but provide, a summary of what we've heard and then sort of some guidance about the critical areas. Ms. O'Neill, what role do you see us playing, convening, helping?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, and I think our role sort of is up to the commission and the parties. Like, this is obviously within the context of what is a pre-rulemaking and coming up to a rulemaking, and sort of the stakeholdering process here is the point, right? Of hearing from the parties and understanding where the pain points are and where we can all improve as a community. So I think really the staff is open to whatever role makes sense to play here in terms of summarizing these comments. Did we get it right? Working through this. I think there will be more stakeholder engagement to be done in the future. This is just a beginning of that process and a very productive beginning. So much appreciated from everyone.
Agreed. Commissioner Plant, questions, comments, anywhere you'd like to go, process individual things?
Yeah, well, I had a couple questions, but I also wanted, I mean, as a pre-rulemaking, my guess is that what we want to see come out of, any stakeholder working groups and things like that are some recommendations on rules that would be a part of the actual rulemaking that would follow this. And I don't know if that needs to be a sort of a working group list of things, or if it comes from each individual entity, or what it might be. But it seems like a lot of this stuff needs to really be memorialized in the rules in one way or another. And that's, I'm not sure exactly how we get from these discussions down to that, but that would be my hope, is that we end up with some the basis for rules that will give us a stronger foundation for future PSPSs. I did have a couple of questions around things that I'm not exactly clear on. I know that, for example, United Power customers' power was off during the PSPS, but I don't know if that's because they're served by Xcel lines, or is that just because they had, you know, downed trees, or was their disconnection at all related to the PSPS from Xcel?
So I'll take a stab at this, and then I'm probably going to ask somebody else to chime in. But as a general proposition, Commissioner Plant, we will have had customers as a general proposition that were out because of the PSPS. Somebody made reference to unplanned outages. There were unplanned outages as well. And so if we had something like on the 17th, 35,000 customers that were out because of the PSPS, we had an additional 100 and some odd thousand, 160,000 that were out because of the windstorm itself. And so if you first of all think of this as a storm, like an ice storm or a snowstorm or any other kind of storm, you're going to have outages because of the storm itself. And that's what we would have seen. As it pertains specifically to United, I don't know if we had, because they're transmission level customers, so I don't know if we had outages that were attributable to the PSPS for United Power, or if those outages would have just been attributable to the windstorm more broadly.
I guess, yeah, one of the things I'm kind of trying to understand is, you know, you have a plan in place for notification of your customers, but then there's these other customers that are perhaps impacted by the shutdown, whether they're transmission service customers or whatever it might be. And I don't know that they're included in that sort of ecosystem of communication. I would expect they probably aren't,
Well, I
which
can say unequivocally for United Power, they were. And so I can, and I'll invite one of my colleagues to be more specific.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. If I may, just real quickly, is when we went and indoctrinated what the critical customer, critical facility, and infrastructure definition was in our wildfire mitigation plan, it includes telecommunications, hospitals, but it unequivocally includes any other utility providers in the area. So that was part of our initial conversations when we were starting to scope out any other potential critical customer impacts. They were notified at that 72-hour mark leading up to the December 17th event, and similarly to the December 19th event and then the January events as well. So we did everything we could from a PSPS perspective, but to Robert's point, you know, we lost a significant amount of customers outside of those areas concerned due to the high wind event. So this is, but they are absolutely at the forefront of that initial communication strategy for critical customers.
And is that communication coming from Xcel to United customers, or is Xcel communicating with United around what parts of the system would be impacted, and then the United contacts the customers? I'm just wondering how that.
No, it's a great point, Commissioner. I appreciate it. So we try to do it in two phases, and I know Ms. Coleman is on from United Power as well, but our strategy was to not only have control center to control center reach out, but we also had government relations teamwork outbound communication going out that way. So we did not directly contact any of the United Power customers, but we did just make notice where we were starting to see the impacts or where this could potentially interlay with each other from a grid perspective, and that's how we communicated.
I don't know, Ms. Coleman, if you want to chime
I
in.
know our panel is later on this afternoon, and I was going to get into those details a little bit then, but
we can get into that later then. I appreciate it. I was just
let's wait.
Yeah, I was just unclear on how that worked. Mr. Kenny, you in one of the charts that you put up, you talked about during the event there's a variety of different places where there's communication with customers. And then during the event, I think it said updates every 24 hours. I'm expecting that probably customers, when they're actually in the event, are a little anxious and wanting to be updated more than once every 24 hours. How are you guys looking at that? And did you feel like that was a sufficient level of communication during the event with the customers.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly which chart that was, but I do know that we communicated with customers through outbound calls, emails, interactive voice recordings, the IVR system. It is an area, candidly, where I will say if our outage maps are working the way that they should be working and that they are updated and accurate, that should give customers at least that have the ability to get onto an outage map, the ability to see in more real time the progress of an outage. And that's an area where I think we've been very transparent that we've got opportunities for improvement there. So is it sufficient? I think what we want to make sure is that the information that we're providing is timely and accurate. The outage map system has been our primary mechanism for doing that, and that's an area where we've acknowledged we've got work to do to improve.
Yeah, I think probably reaching out to customers more frequently during the event might be helpful. There were a few things. I mean, obviously a lot of impacts, and we heard from a lot of people around various different impacts. But I think one of the things that, or a few of the things that really stood out to me was the loss of power to cell towers. I think the 911 issues that experienced, I think it was Gold Hill, but it may have been other places. And my understanding is that those are controlled by Lumen. And I'm wondering if Xcel has been in any kind of conversations with Lumen around that kind of backup power that would enable 911 to stay to stay operating during an event like this, but maybe would be an asset to the system as a whole separately. And then I think, Mr. Kenny, you mentioned 151 medically impacted folks that were contacted and an attempt to try and address their issues. Is that 151, in your view, a fairly good representation of the number of people who are medically impacted by these types of events, or is there some way that we can improve coordination between maybe the county human services agencies or whatever, whoever might have more information around who those medically impacted folks might be with the utility?
I'm going to take the second question first about the medically vulnerable customers. We did undertake either in late 24 or early 25 an exercise to reach out to all of our customers to let them know that we have programs specific for them. So you may know that separate and apart from PSPS, we have a discounted rate for customers that are on medical equipment that uses a lot of electricity. So we don't have any way of knowing if you're a medically vulnerable customer unless you tell us. So that's kind of, let's start with that starting point. We wouldn't know who they are without them telling us. So we've done outreach to customers to say, broadly, update your contact information, your emergency contact information, but also if you're on durable medical equipment, to please let us know, because we have a discounted rate for you. And now that we've stood up our wildfire mitigation program, we have the ability to contact you more earlier than we would every other customer. And so we did undertake that outbound communication. I think that's something we're going to need to do on a regular cadence as well, to let customers know that. Secondarily, to your point about coordination with offices of emergency management and offices of health and human services, I think there's always opportunities to strengthen that. I think that's why we, at least I think in Jefferson County, we had somebody embedded in the Office of Emergency Management there. I think so. I think there's opportunities to explore how we can better embed ourselves with these offices of emergency management at the county level. On your second or your first question about Lumen, I don't know if we've spoken directly to Lumen, and I'll ask one of my colleagues to chime in. I can say at a general level, cell towers are considered a part of a critical piece of infrastructure that should be on our list, so that we are rerouting or avoiding de-energizing them to the greatest extent possible, and or making sure there's enough advance notice so they can take precautions for backup power. I don't know specifically about Lumen, and would invite one of my colleagues to help me there.
I'd also say Lumen's on the agenda for later today.
Okay. Yeah, and we can get to that later. And then the only other thing I did want, I think, Mr. Chard, you mentioned a list of 6 things that you'd like to see the company complete prior to energization. And I just wanted to ask that you submit your comments and to the commission so that we can have that as a part of those things as a part of the record, and that we get that from you.
Happy to do that, sir. I just want to make sure, just so you know, that I've got to run that through a couple of local stakeholders to make
Yep.
sure that they're in green support. One being the chief on the call is finding out if the things that we've discussed, if they find value in that, would want that to occur. And then once we get that vetting process done, I'll be happy to submit those upward.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
You bet.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Plant. Mr. Whittington.
So just to give the commission kind of an awareness of what we're ultimately facing when it comes to critical infrastructure and deconflicting between Xcel Energy's list of critical infrastructure, vulnerable populations. I have the list on my other screen of critical infrastructure sites that were given to us from Xcel Energy. 82,316 sites that they're showing as critical infrastructure within Jefferson County. That amount of information, while great, doesn't really start to break down the criticality, as you heard Scott with the City of Golden talk about, of the golf course is on, but my county jail is off. So when we start looking at this working group that Director Chart spoke about, those are the types of things I would like to see as one of the bullet points out of those. How are we defining critical infrastructure? How are we determining criticality of each site? And then, as came up in our after action here locally, can Xcel help promote the local programs? Like we use lookout alerts for our just-in-time notification for individuals, or opt-in alerts, as well as Smart 911, so that we're not creating 2 lists of vulnerable populations within a known community. If Jefferson County as a county has something, Boulder County has something, we can start working together on those types of things. So just a thought.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Kenny, I'm sorry, I just had a question related to that, because it seems like, as was pointed out around the Golden situation, it seems like the utility would really be the one that would know whether or not someone's being fed by a line that's planned for disconnection. Is it possible for an individual or a business to put in an address and find out if they would be impacted by a shutoff? Because other than that, I can't imagine anybody's going to know what feeder goes where, and who's going to be impacted while their neighbor is. And I know we heard that from a restaurant in Golden during the public comments. Is there a way to do that and make it easier for people to know?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's 2 things that are embedded in that. Yes, we have customers and we know where they are on a feeder. Once we have an ideal state for our public facing outage management maps, would allow a customer and a general proposition to be able to put in their address and see whether they're in or out. And so so you're correct in that regard. I think I want to just go back to the 82,000 critical customers in Jefferson County. I think our teams are working together to refine that list. I don't think we see 82,000 customers as critical infrastructure. I would say a golf course, just in common parlance, wouldn't be considered a critical piece of infrastructure. I would not, if I'm comparing a golf course to a jail, a cell tower, a nursing home, the golf course would not be something we would consider a critical piece of infrastructure. We've gone through this exercise with each of our counties where they've told us what they think a critical piece of infrastructure is, and we've come back and said what we think it is. Like each individual Verizon store would not be considered a critical piece of infrastructure because it's a cell phone company, but a cell tower owned by Verizon would be. So I think we want to make sure that we're aligned and that we are defining them the same way. And that we're not, so 82,000 sounds very high to me. I'm not I don't know where that number came from, but it sounds very high to me. Like each individual streetlight is not going to be considered an individual piece of critical infrastructure, because that would lead to an absurd result. So, but the point is, we've got our community affairs teams working with our county OEMs to make sure that we come to a mutually agreeable definition of what it is and then what's on the list.
I guess, Mr. Vargo, we're hitting time here. Mr. Vargo, do you have one really quick thing or anything to add?
Yeah.
I want to give Commissioner Gilman a chance to.
Yeah, just very quickly, I just want to make it clear that I was not in any way suggesting the golf course was critical infrastructure. I was making the point it is absolutely not critical infrastructure, but it is surrounded by the jail and the rest of the Jefferson County government complex. And our water treatment facility is critical infrastructure, and it was also shut down. I just want to make that point clear.
Okay, got it. Commissioner Gilman, you got a couple questions, one or two questions for the team and the panelists?
Yeah, just in three main areas. So first, I like the working group idea, and I think we'll have to understanding, everyone on this call is not maybe necessarily participate in PUC proceedings as their main role, but trying to figure out how kind of such a group would interact then with the rulemaking process. And I think our near term goal is what needs to get in rules. And then there also can be an implementation group. And so trying to kind of parse out what needs to be done where seems like important kind of near term work. To the extent we do some of that in the working group, I think understanding certainly what is being worked on at the company now. Mr. Kenny had said, there are several things you're proactively working on. I think having better line of sight to what is being worked on and what the timelines are for those things. Just simply understanding what's being worked on is not incredibly helpful to us unless we understand what the actual timeline for resolution of those issues is. So the first issue, and I don't know if there was exactly a question here, but it seems as though the overlap of PSPS outages and then the actual outages that occur from a storm is incredibly confusing to the general public. And from what I heard last week, could actually be causing potentially some commercial insurance problems for businesses and things who are not getting reimbursed for business interruption and things if they were part of a PSPS. And so it seems like whatever that transition is from when it was a PSPS and now it's a real outage for cause, just seems really confusing and convoluted to people. And so I think one of our to-dos needs to be to clean up the communication, the understanding of what is the cause of my outage right now and what is my estimated restoration time. And I think Mr. Vargo had indicated, at least his understanding is there's really no expectation for restoration in the dark because of the inspection requirement. I actually don't know if that's true, honestly. So, I don't know if anyone has any insight for that, but the extent to which that influences restoration time and what the general public can expect or understand seems like that would be very helpful to better understand.
Yeah, I can take that, Robert. Commissioner Gilman, yeah, I agree with you completely. And even as I was listening into this call, there is a lot of confusion about public safety shutoffs, why we're doing them, and then also the outages that occur. And so I think what gets lost when we're talking to the general public is that we're doing this because there's damage that's going to occur to our system, likely going to occur to our system because of extreme winds and really a storm that is coming through. And so what I think gets lost is they realize that we're doing it for fire mitigation and for protection, and they understand the wind aspect. But had we not done a public safety shutoff, the vast majority of those customers would have been out of power anyways. And that's due to that storm that is coming through, and that's due to the winds. So I think the more that we communicate that or explain that they're out of power proactively, but they most likely were going to be out of power anyways. that would help them understand that once that wind comes through, it's not as easy as just flipping the switch and getting them back on. Now we have to repair all of that damage, and we have to get out there and replace the poles and pick up the spans of wire. And a big piece that Commissioner Stoltzman and Director Chard brought up is we have to be very careful after that, because if we rush and quickly try to get those back on and we don't do a quality patrol, we're likely gonna start a wildfire, and that's exactly what we're trying to prevent. So we have to be very careful at the tail end of the storm to make sure we do those patrols.
Yeah, I think I generally understand that. And truthfully, I didn't hear from the general public last week confusion about why PSPS are occurring. I actually heard an incredible level of understanding from affected customers on concern for their community and really like the potential for a real dangerous situation. Where there's confusion is when that turns into an outage for cause, and how does that affect my restoration time? And like, yes, you're going to go out and inspect, but it feels like customers are quite literally in the dark after this PSPS. So like, what's going on now? There could be a tree on my line. There could not be, and so it feels like a real cloud of confusion after the initial event, which like I actually heard a ton of understanding is probably warranted. But like, then what? It feels like there's not a lot of kind of flavors or like parsing of information being given that would be really helpful to the understanding after that, when people are sitting there for 5 days wondering, well, what is going on now? What's the cause now? And I think so it's not the why, it's like what's going on currently, the current status, and restoration estimates seem like they could use.
Yeah, can I make a comment about that just real quick? Because a couple things I just want to. Once the weather passes, you're going to have the PSPS damage and you're going to have the regular storm damage. And at that point, we've still got to inspect it all. And so the point that I was trying to make to customers before the PSPS event is that your power's not going to come back on immediately after the wind subsides. Because irrespective of whether the damage was caused by a PSPS or just caused because of the wind event, the inspection process still has to happen. The other point I want to make, though, is about the confusion, commercial insurance companies denying people's claims because of a PSPS versus an unplanned outage. I want to make sure that we don't end up trying to do through rules something that should be taken care of at the state level through the insurance commission, because I don't want to create a perverse incentive for the utility to either do or do not do a PSPS because we're trying to help a person be able to file an insurance claim. Like our decision-making process has to be guided by public safety and not by commercial insurance considerations. And I don't think that's what you were suggesting, but I just want to make sure that it's clear that when we're making these decisions, we're doing it based upon risk assessment, objective criteria with public safety in mind.
Yeah, no, not the point I was making, but the point I was making is it is unclear to any customer why they are out at a given point in time, and that needs to improve. Culture.
It did, Miss Stoltzman. Did you want to really jump in briefly?
Yeah, briefly. I thank you for the question and comment. I think part of the issue is there's this balancing exercise that should be happening and is happening, where we want to give people as much advance notice as possible, but then of course as we get closer to an event, we have better information, and during an event we have better information. So because we've been requesting more advance notice, it means that there are sometimes broader areas that get information shared with them that you may have a power shut off, and as we get closer it gets narrowed. And then there are people that are confused because they never were projected from a forecast to be in a shutoff area. And so there was no planned notification because it was never planned. And that's who seemed to be the most confused in our area, was that people who had what I'm calling unplanned outages, but just outages, want to understand why they weren't notified in advance. And it's because it was not planned. like your power is out. And so that's part of the confusion, I think, is in the communication in the lead up, that just because you don't get a text message from Xcel, an email from Xcel, like, you know, a lot of customers got notified every day for the 5 days in advance of the thing, and they were well aware. Just because you don't get that, if there's 120-mile-an-hour wind in your area, your power may go out, as well as other things, like your roof may blow off. We don't send people notifications that their roof may blow off. So I think it's the communication piece leading up to it, just making sure people are aware that even if you don't get notified that your power's planned to go out, your power may go out.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Selzer, probably you. I just wanted to follow up on that question. The expectation, will power be restored in the dark given the inspection requirement? And also, does the company utilize any mutual aid or other assistance to bolster crews in order to ensure that you're staffed up for kind of such catastrophic restoration efforts?
Yeah, so for mutual assistance, that's a lever that we'll pull depending on the size of the impact of the
Did
storm.
you? I'm not like
In this
asking
instance, no, we had enough internal and contract resources that it was well covered. I don't think any additional resources would have got customers back on any quicker in the event in December.
So if I think maybe 5 to 7 days, somewhere in there, was the maximum timelines. We saw some customers out. You're saying with additional crews that would not have improved. I guess what would be the estimated restoration duration that you think bringing in extra distribution crews would be necessary?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Every storm is a little bit different. And so having the right amount of resources on each feeder is important. Certainly we could flood resources and have them on the feeder, but then you have coordination issues, you have communication concerns, safety concerns. So it's really important that you have the right amount of resources on each feeder. In this event in December, we had about 4 crews per feeder. Which any more than that, you start getting diminishing returns. They're not going to do the work any quicker, and ultimately it becomes a coordination issue. So yeah, I would say we had more than enough.
That's 4 crews per feeder that was out?
That's what we had, 4 crews per feeder. Yep.
How many feeders were out?
I'd have to, well, give me a second, I can get you that answer, but
Okay.
I don't have enough time.
And then that restoration of the dark question.
Yeah, so that we've changed that recently, so that could be why there was some confusion. We do allow crews to do restoration at night. It's a judgment call, but given the concerns again that the folks from Boulder mentioned, if they can't see the line and they're in mountainous area, we discourage it, because if there's a line down and they happen to miss it using flashlights and different things like that, it presents a very real risk for a wildfire. So we err very much on the side of caution when it comes to patrolling at night.
Okay, thanks. Sorry I'm going so rapid fire, but
it's okay.
Like 2 minutes to do all this, and I'm taking more than 2 minutes. Another question, specifically, especially for the December 17th PSPS, a lot of people have mentioned the original warning area was far larger, maybe up to like 500,000 customers, and then the actual execution was far smaller. I think that in some part was due to a change in weather, potentially, but it seemed like in some part, at least, was also due to a lack of granularity of the company and understanding perhaps some of its infrastructure. So curious to understand what kind of databases or understanding the company has internally as to the specific of its assets, included kind of interrelationship with regard to feeders, especially where is infrastructure undergrounded. And then did just want to bring up, as part of that question, I know in the wildfire mitigation plan, the company had committed to completing a database of its assets, like specifically to identify a lot of this information very readily. And so wanted to understand the status and timeline associated with that effort, which is really kind of the same question. What do we have? When can we expect to have better granularity of information on your side about these assets to narrow the scope?
Yeah, I'm not sure on the database. Somebody else better suited to answer that question, but I can comment on the initial scope being large. Due to timing and our need to get out the communication out to customers, the initial scope is what the weather is forecasted, and it's the impact on our system. So getting that communication out there, we don't know necessarily how we're going to carve that down. We have to look at a multitude of factors, whether, like you had mentioned, underground. We're going to start looking at what we can sectionalize. Can we keep this section on and turn this section off, or do we have to take out the full section? All of that takes some time and analysis. So we communicate initially to all of those customers that could be in the scope, just to err on the side of caution. And then as we do that analysis and get that scoping down, we start communicating to the customers that are no longer in that area of concern. But it really takes time to make sure that we're doing it right, because we don't want to scope out customers that could be within a wildfire risk. And our engineers and our operations folks are diligently working on that as we get closer to the go live. But yeah, as far as the database, I'm sure there's a good answer for you. I'm just not sure on that one.
Maybe one more question. We're running out of time, Commissioner Gilman.
Oh, I'm just waiting for an answer on that previous one.
Yeah.
Well, we do have an asset database. I'm not sure which provision in the wildfire mitigation plan specifically. Part of what we do when we have this large area of concern based upon the weather and everything else that Gil said, that's what part of the reason why it's large. We're able to scope it down based upon precisely that, knowing that we have a feeder that we think is in scope based upon the weather conditions. We can go look at that feeder in the database, and that's 85% of it's underground. We can de-scope or shrink the scope. So I'm not exactly sure what the requirement was that we put into the wildfire mitigation plan, but we do know where our poles and where our wires are, where the feeders are, what customers are on those feeders. So we have that exists today. But I think, and I think Commissioner Stolzman kind of said it. We start out large because you've got a large area of concern, and as you get closer to the event, it's necessarily going to get shrunk down. But we are going through this process of starting large, and then looking at where we can de-scope, for want of a better phrase, or make the scope smaller based upon exactly what you just described, what Gil was describing.
Mr. Shard, really brief. We're over time. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, it's my first virtual meeting. Apologies. I just want to put a pin in this, is that, Commissioner, to your point, this is a real point of concern for us. Starting large, I know from a utility perspective, it feels great, but from an impact on community, it has some really significant impacts, and have done a lot of urbanized alerting in the last 4 or 5 years since Marshall. I can tell you that while you do it for caution, you're doing it to like hedge your bets a bit. Folks that are vulnerable, people that have got family members and others that are starting to plan, they're going to start reacting to that, or they're not going to react to it. So being precise in the way that we're communicating risk and how we're then prescribing protective action measures really needs to be the central point of the policy around this, and then how we're going to go through execution on it. I do believe the polygon piece, if there's some way to do that, 500,000 people were there. Not all those urbanized areas were fire risk. They were well outside of an urban interface environment. And I think that if we look at that from a fire perspective with some subject matter experts in this working group, we might be able to engage in some pretty good dialogue with Xcel and maybe come with a different strategy around that could have less impact on the community, increase our messaging, and put us in a better spot so we're not so overreacting, because that's going to have some consequences that can be quite dire. People are moving out of their support systems that they built throughout the year, and then all of a sudden we're having them shift because we're saying you got to take action because you potentially are in a bad situation. So more to come. I think we can tackle that though, and really refine this. I hope Xcel agrees with that.
I do agree, and I know Chairman Blank, you want to move on. I want to say I do agree with that. I think there is a distinction between whether we communicate and the content of that communication, and I think somewhere in between is where we find the answer, because we don't want to get to the point where we aren't communicating the potential for bad weather. And at the same time, we want to be mindful of what you just said, Director Chard, that we don't want to over communicate so that people either become desensitized to it, or we panic them to take them out of their management plan of how they're dealing with these circumstances. And so I do think there's a way that we can put our heads together determine what that content should be, the content of that communication, without desensitizing people. But I don't want to under communicate either. So I think absolutely there's a way for us to talk about that. The other thing I'll say is I heard from you and others on Friday about the localized communication systems, the outbound kind of the Amber Alert at the local level. I think that's also an opportunity that we want to explore too, is how we better make use of that. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I saw a lot of heads nodding with your comments, Mr. Kenny. Let's take a 3-minute break till 2:50, and we'll come back with the next panel. 2:50 with the next panel. Give Commissioner Plant up. There he is. Mr. Hurtado, CenturyLink, 5 minutes, sir.
5 minutes. Good afternoon. Thanks for the time. I'll do a quick overview of what we have here due to time. Some of the questions that were asked prior to for the panel was, yes, we were notified of the events prior, right? We do have a good account manager with Xcel that reached out to us a couple of days prior. We touched base with them. We asked to be given the site, the outage maps, the sooner the better, so we can then identify sites. It could be anywhere between our national sites, our local sites, right? It could be our remote terminals or central offices or data centers, right? So depending on what sites we have, then we start doing an internal protocol, which is obviously a similar protocol to what we do when it comes to hurricanes, or this past couple of weekends our winter storms on the East Coast, right? All similar, which is basically to verify those sites that aren't generated, we have enough fuel. We check battery reserves. We check the redundancy for those sites throughout. Second thing is we want to verify we have enough resources in the field to make sure that we address any issues that come up. It could be either internal resources or field technicians or our vendors, right? Situations like this, obviously, we're going to have generators running for multiple days. So we want to make sure we have fuel for those sites, enough fuel, so we won't go down. We'll also have generator vendors on the side, just in case something does happen to the generator. So we have redundancy plans in place for that situation as well. We also notified our network command center of, hey, parts of Colorado, these are the sites that are going to be on alarm. In case something else comes in, please notify us of any other issues. The other things so that's, again, staging to make sure we have, if we need more assets, where do we pull those assets from, right? Do we need fuel? Do we need personnel? All those are in play when it comes to these outages. Do we do our tabletop exercises? We do. We perform our business continuity plans. We go through these reviews as power outages, events of a hurricane, events of cold weather, right? What do we do to mitigate a bigger outage, right? So those are all conducted internally with both our field partners, our network partners, different stakeholders within the company itself, right? To ensure that, again, we mitigate a bigger outage. What went well with this? From my experience, our liaison that we have with Xcel communicated well with us. His name, I think, Jeff Skillen. He was our account manager for us. Communicated, say, hey, this is gonna be down. We're either gonna go yay or nay on this day, and we'll let you know, right? Obviously, we would want to know a little bit further, a little bit more of advanced time, so we can then make sure our technicians and we start our generators, and we make sure we have that portion up and running correctly. But he did notify us. He kept us in the loop as well throughout the process because I had questions. Some of the issues we ran into is what I'm hearing everybody say here is unplanned outages, right? Due to the windstorms, due to other issues. So then we had to relocate resources from the current outage or bring in additional resources to offset those for the windstorm outages that caused, other issues for power. And then the other issue we did have is during some long duration outages, after everything was restored, we still had a couple of sites that were still not on commercial power. We opened up tickets with Xcel. Sorry, someone had a question? Oh, okay. We opened up tickets with Xcel, and then the turnaround for that was a little bit delayed, right? So I think moving forward, we would like to see a better escalation process. If we do have sites that are high priority, like our central offices that have a lot of traffic in them for our customers, we would like a better, easier way to escalate that restore for that site, correct? To mitigate a bigger issue than we have to. In regards to the 911 outages I keep hearing about with everyone on here, I do know that my regulatory peers and my government peers, they're working on those specific cases throughout those counties that were affected, right? So I myself don't have information on those, but I know that they're being looked into by our regulatory personnel.
Thank you so much, sir. And we'll have some questions for you in a few minutes. Milena Taylor, Colorado Center on Law and Policy.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, Commission, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Melina Taya, and I am a policy advocate at Colorado Center on Law and Policy, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization advancing the rights of every Coloradoan. We focus on food, income, housing, and health through litigation, legislation, research, and advocacy. I am here to provide comments and recommendations regarding the December 2025 planned power shutoff plan that was implemented by Xcel Energy. I am an Xcel Energy customer. I became aware of the PSPS when our contract lobbyist forwarded the notice from Melanie Roth, the Emergency Response Coordinator at Health Facilities and Emergency Medical Services Division at CDPHE. Only then was I aware of the PSPS. Eventually, when Xcel shortened the map of the shutoffs to be in Boulder, Clear Creek, Jefferson, Larimer, and Weld counties, I still did not get communication and was still anticipating to be shut off. But we at CCLP outreached the community impacted and received their feedback. Most households spoken to experienced a 2.5 to 3 days of the power outage in Boulder and Evergreen. These community members were notified of the planned shutoff via text, email, and on account holders' billing pages. So what went well? Speaking to residents and customers of Xcel in Boulder and Evergreen areas, some appreciated getting advance notification of the outage, which allowed many to find flashlights and candles, make sure phones and other items were charged in advance. Some reported having gas fireplaces or a gas grill to be able to maintain heat and be able to cook during the outage. The residents that we spoke to noted that while it was very inconvenient and a little chilly, they did not suffer or lose any food. Though they noted that without prior notification, it would have been a lot worse. So what did not go so well from their comments? Others were less fortunate. An individual's wife that is in a facility due to dementia shared that the backup power at that facility that was set up was not sufficient to light more than hallways and emergency equipment. Other consumers mentioned concerns and difficulties in keeping their food cold, as many people had purchased large amount of food to prepare for the incoming holidays. Having individuals and households rely on generators did not go as planned for many. Generators that run on gas can only be refilled if the household has the finances and access to refill those. Gas stations that were in the areas of the shutoff were also closed because they use electrical pumps to then have the gasoline pumps working. Unless they have the money to purchase multiple gallons of gasoline, the gas generators are not as helpful as they intend to be. For those that had to travel to the next open gas station was about a 14-mile travel, and not everybody is able to make such commutes. We recommend additional communication and planning efforts with local law enforcement and first responders, so we echo previous speakers on that. Considering that they are going to be the ones dispatched at the time the outage takes place, their expertise is vital to continued efforts for this plan to work sufficiently. We would also encourage Xcel Energy to outreach their medically frail identified customers to ensure that they are prepared and answer any questions they may have. We would also encourage to contact and partner with local health organizations and clinics that can provide additional information and assistance for the medically vulnerable customers. Additionally, we recommend ways to work with local gas stations in preparation for future shutoffs. If there are ways to partner with gas stations to allow for discounted or rebated costs for gasoline for backup generators would be beneficial, in addition to turning on power selectively if possible. I understand the grid's very delicate, to allow local consumers access to refill their gasoline power generators. For local grocery stores, we recommend communicating with their managers and determining how to provide generators to ensure the loss of foods are not substantial. Following a power outage, those who are able to are going to need to restock on any foods they may have lost. So it's imperative that these stores are communicated with in advance. Education was a significant part of the feedback we received from consumers. More consistent updates for when the power is estimated to be restored, providing information on lessons learned to consumers directly, and additional explanations on why our power structure works and is shut off as planned are recommended moving forward. Language access should also be a key focus for the future, ensuring that consumers, regardless of the language of their hearts, should be warned of the potential shutoffs. We urge Xcel Energy to work with local communities. They operate in and obtain communications in each language possible and include those who are hard of hearing and deaf. We are definitely applauding the PUC and Xcel Energy in your guys' collaboration to make sure the next time the plan is implemented that barriers and the unintended consequences that arise from December shutoffs are avoided. I know that together, the next time the shutoffs are necessary, that it will be a significant improvement from December's. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Steve Silverman, Communications Director, Boulder County Sheriff.
Hello, Commissioner. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate the time today. As you've heard from many of my colleagues earlier in the previous panel, there's some themes to our asks. When we were requested to participate in this, we were asked, were you aware? And my answer is absolutely. We were aware these were coming. From the April 2024 public safety power shutdown to the December ones that we were impacted in Boulder County, most of that information came through our Office of Disaster Management and our strong partnership as we share building and staff between the two groups. You heard Director Mike Chard talk about the notification process and some of the challenges that we've had, and I'm going to reiterate some of those same things. The biggest challenge we had was the lack of detailed mapping, which I'll get to some of those specifics in a little bit. But we also have we face the challenge, and I'm sure as many other counties do, in that we have multiple power companies. We've got 6 different power companies that are providing power to customers throughout our footprint, and that we dispatch for in our 911 center. And understanding the intricacies is really important to us, so we can predict and plan for those impacts to the public safety power or the public safety systems that we manage. One thing that went well was the communication between our 911 staff and Xcel during the incidents, all of them, all 3 of them. We have a direct line to their dispatch center, and they always answered the phone. We sincerely appreciated that. I think both groups were triaging calls in a different manner. And just to give you a little bit of insight to how my staff were handling it, is when those calls would come in to our center, we had an extremely high call volume, as you can imagine, and so did Xcel and all those that are on this call. But we would report any arcing or sparking lines to Xcel's staff. And then we'd also send the fire department to get some eyes on it to make sure there wasn't a public safety hazard or we didn't need to take further action. For all other reports, our staff were telling the community to report it through the means that Xcel had provided. There was a text messaging system that was convenient, and that seemed to work well, although we fielded hundreds of calls where one improvement suggestion we would have is that the communication on how to report issues and what to report should be clearly identified in public safety, or I should say public education materials. One of the questions we got was, what do we do to prepare? We do a lot to prepare for these, and detail makes a big difference to us. It makes a big difference to public safety agencies we dispatch for, as you heard from Chief O'Brien earlier. And the things that the dispatch center uses, this detailed mapping that we would request. You heard about the polygons and the providing better specifics to what areas are going to get shut down. But we use it to estimate our needs for staffing. We know that a wind incident, regardless of public safety power shutdown or not, is going to increase our call volume, and so do our user agencies, as you heard from Chief O'Brien, of staffing up and some of these volunteer agencies across Boulder County. We do the same. We also call in command staff from our user agencies to be able to support and triage calls appropriately, such as a fire resource coordination officer from 1 or 2 of our fire departments that can help stand next to the dispatcher and triage those calls as they're coming in and being dispatched, so we don't create a significant drawdown on our public safety response groups. We also use it to anticipate what areas are going to lose 911 service. We have a special focus on the mountainous areas that don't have any cellular coverage and depend critically on the Lumen landlines, as it's been mentioned on this call before. Our radio technicians use that detailed mapping to anticipate any kind of issues with the systems, and especially our public safety radio infrastructure, whether it's our digital or our VHF system. Both of them are critical to our response operations, and having that detailed mapping of understanding what might go down is critical to them too. We use it to minimize our efforts of coordination with CenturyLink or Lumen with reference to generators. There are hundreds of remote terminals out in our areas that do not have power, and some of that battery backup is unreliable. So as soon as the power shuts down, those communities, such as Gold Hill, which was mentioned before, lose landline capabilities immediately. We have developed a partnership with Lumen to work and coordinate with the distribution of generators as needed during events like this. And without detailed mapping, we can't create that anticipated areas that are going to be impacted. And lastly, and certainly not least, we use detailed mapping to understand the gaps that may or may not receive emergency alerts. The emergency alerting system is highly complex, using all sorts of technology, from wireless emergency alerts, the emergency alerting system, through the ticker that goes across the bottom of broadcast television, or what you hear on AM/FM radio. And then, of course, people that have opted in with their landline, cell phones, and other means of communication to receive emergency alerts. If we don't have the understanding of where these power shutdowns are going to be, we don't have the ability to pre-stage fire crews at fire stations, pre-plan patrols with our law enforcement, and then also anticipate on where people may not be able to get the emergency alerts. Last thing I want to talk about real quick is the coordination of power restoration. We look at this as just important as it is just as important to the process as it is notifying people of the public safety power shutoff. Why? It's not much different than for us than repopulating an evacuated area. It is usually, power is usually turned on in maybe a different order or a different footprint than it was shut off. And thoughtfulness has to go into the communication to public safety and the community on what the workflows look like for turning the power back on. And I'll read something real quick from our radio technicians specific to our mountain towers. They feel that restoring power to mountain communication towers sites is essential. Many of these locations are difficult to access, particularly during the winter months, and they can, which can delay generator refueling for extended periods of time, or until conditions can actually allow for getting up there through snowmobiles or tracked UTVs. These sites are both critical for first responders and cellular services, affecting 911 call handling and the delivery of emergency alerts to the public. So in summary, as you heard from Commissioner Stoltzman and our Office of Disaster Director, Mike Chard, we support this type of strategy for fire prevention, but we're seeking improved communications, detailed mapping, well-defined published workflows, so that public safety can allow for the appropriate preparedness and staff real-time emergency response. Thank you very much for your time, and happy to take questions when we're all done.
Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it. Ms. Kimberly Culp, CEO, Laramie Emergency Telephone Authority, 5 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Larimer Emergency Telephone Authority, and we cover Larimer and Jackson County 31 government partners. So good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. From our perspective, the December PSPS events had material impacts on 911 operations and our communities. Even in areas where 911 centers and what we would refer to the acronym PSAP facilities remained powered on, there was still an impact to 911. When power is intentionally shut off, the impacts extend far beyond electricity. They intersect directly with emergency communications, evacuations, medical dependency, and the community's access to help. We were aware that the PSPS existed as a wildfire mitigation tool. However, awareness of policy does not equal readiness for community level public safety impacts. And that's a gap that we definitely experienced. In Colorado, PSPS is still emerging operationally. It's, I'm going to say, relatively new on that bell curve for us. December demonstrated that PSPS can affect 911 service even when the 911 center doesn't lose power. So we may be equipped with emergency backup power, but this is really about our communities. And that distinction does matter. 911 is the community's lifeline. It is often the only connection to help, especially during wildfire evacuation and extreme weather events. In many of our communities, we also serve vulnerable populations and residents who rely on that power for medical devices, communication equipment, mobility, and residents who do not have cell coverage, and they do rely solely on that landline service that Steve just mentioned. And during the December PSPS events, we saw real world risks where loss of power to residential phone service or central office infrastructure, as the Lumen partner brought forward, removed a community member's only way to reach 911. And when that happens, the mitigation is no longer technical. It becomes a physical response, such as door-to-door checks and evacuations. And that is a serious escalation of risk and resource demand. At a conceptual level, the PSPS sequence outlined in their section 3 of their plan was followed: the watch period, confirmation, de-energization, and restoration. However, the notifications were primarily received for us through general utility and OEM channels, which are not designed to address the infrastructure dependencies of the 911 system. For emergency communications, timing and specific impacts do matter. And knowing that a PSPS may occur is not the same as knowing which communities, which communication paths, and which lifelines are at risk. And that's critical information that we need to know. We really need to know what those communication paths are going to be impacted. So as a result, we did take immediate action, and Steve did a great job highlighting all of that. And those actions are resource intensive. We had to think about how we were going to notify our communities. If power's lost and the only lifeline is a landline that's impacted by the outage, we cannot reach that resident electronically. And that does represent a single point of failure with no technical mitigation. And in those cases, again, it may require an in-person response, which increases that risk and delays to assistance. We did participate in outage and infrastructure failure exercises, and we take preparedness seriously. However, the PSPS introduces distinct reliability challenges that are not fully captured in traditional exercises. And the other panel specifically discussed joint PSPS exercises, but I think that joint exercise not only needs to expand beyond utilities and our OEM partners, but the 911 authorities, PSAPs, and critical infrastructure partners. We cannot fully protect the public if each sector is planning in parallel rather than together. And in my opinion, there are several changes we believe are critical. First, we need 911 reliability impact analysis. So that would be my first recommendation as part of the PSPS planning, including transparency around who leases infrastructure from whom and where backup power exists and where it does not. Lumen discussed all of the review of their critical infrastructure, but infrastructure still failed and experienced an impact, and therefore our communities were left vulnerable. We as public safety professionals need to know what infrastructure is at risk and what risk can't be mitigated. So where are we going to be without power where there isn't a generator that is ready and able to back up that critical infrastructure? Our regulatory peers, our government peers are working on the 911 impact, and I would love that work to be filed to the commission for your review. So you have that awareness as well. Second, the PSPS planning must explicitly account for shared infrastructure and single points of failure, especially where those failures remove a resident's ability to call 911. And finally, wildfire mitigation through PSPS and emergency communications reliability must be planned together. Otherwise, we reduce the risk in one area while unintentionally increasing risk in another, particularly for our most vulnerable populations. So in closing, when PSPS actions materially affect our 911 systems, those impacts fall squarely within public safety responsibility and regional oversight. And our shared goal should be wildfire prevention without compromising access to emergency help. And I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have when we get to that portion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we're there. Maybe we could each just ask one question or make one comment. And I guess mine would be Mr. Hurtado. If you could just help us figure out how the regulated utility, how the company, public service company can assist in making sure we have backup power and to the extent and where needed, that would be greatly appreciated. I don't know if you have any comments, thoughts, guidance on how we do that, but it seems like getting this backup power for this critical infrastructure is key.
Yeah, no, I believe that you guys have helped in the past with a generator and a fuel trailer in the last couple of, I believe, last year or two. But I think for us, we do have a lot of sites throughout Colorado, and to his point, a lot of mountain sites that we do need to have backup in certain areas, correct? So I think for us, just to identify specific locations and sites and go from there and have that discussion with the local townships. I know my regulatory peers and my government liaison peers have started those discussions already, but I think it's just for us identifying those and continue to have those discussions and bring up any concerns that you guys have so we can address them accordingly.
Commissioner Plant, if you got one question, comment.
Yeah. No, I'll just to expand on Chair Blank's question. If you could also work with Xcel. I mean, there's areas where I think, the battery backup could provide a real asset to the grid when it's not, in a critical situation, but then be available for the 911 service when it is. And, maybe we can get a benefit on both sides if you're able
Yeah.
to work with the utility.
To your point, tomorrow actually our account manager for Xcel, we have a meeting with him, all right, and we're going to discuss a couple of things, what could have done better. But we're working on prioritizing which sites, right? Because again, there's a lot of sites out there, but what's prioritized? What's our customer impact, right? What is it? So we're continuing to work with them and identify those. I'm going to ask for us to be get the direct number to their command center, right? That's one thing I'm going to ask for Xcel. We need to have that constant communication straight through. And two, be part of those conversations with the internal departments when it comes to having a better outage map. Because as soon as we identify exactly which of our sites are going to be impacted, we can then address assets and personnel to those sites, right? But we all say, once blue skies happen, we're good to go. We're being as proactive as we can. But how do we react when it's a reactive mode? How do we mitigate that outage, right? Because we're going to have unplanned outages during a planned outage. But how do we react to that, right? So I think there's a couple of pieces that we can do better with Xcel and go from there. So,
Mr. Silberman.
Yeah, I just would like to throw out there that there is an ongoing working group that we have recently invited Xcel, and they've been participating. It's really localized in Boulder County, but we're happy to expand that to other areas. We've had since 2020, after the Calwood fire here in Boulder County, we've had a working group that between Lumen staff, regulatory staff, and local Lumen 911 program holders that to talk through these issues and these challenges and problems. We recently resurrected that group, brought the band back together, and did that after the December public safety power shutdowns, and that's where we included Xcel. So I'd hate to reinvent the wheel where we've already got a foundation with the right core people that just could be expanded. And we've also included PUC staff in some of those conversations, especially back in 2020 after the Calwood fire. So we've already got a model, and I would offer that could be built upon to continue the conversation.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, just to follow up from Mr. Silberman, real quick, you had talked about your desire for more detailed mapping and also, I think, coordination of restoration efforts, so you all understood where that would be transpiring. And I was just curious, what, if any, info do you receive now, like say in the most recent events about those restoration assumptions? Do you understand where crews are working and expect to energize? If so, what's the forum that you know that or understand the actual area impacted? And if not, do you foresee, do you have an idea on what tool would work best or how that information best gets communicated in a thorough way to you?
Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. We have very limited information on the details of what's happening during a power restoration. We really just get times on when it's expected, not much different than the general public gets. That's why I specifically had kind of put the workflow, create a workflow that includes public safety for the re-energizing of the area, because that'll help us anticipate when power is going to be restored for all the things we talked about, the public safety infrastructure for radio systems, the not ability to alert people during a emergency with emergency alerts, and then also when people can reach us, of course, with 911. So if we're included somehow in there, in the notification of the where the areas are being re-energized and when, or when they've just been turned on, that would be really helpful for us. How we do that, I think there's lots of options on workflows and who should be notified to get it to us. But right now, all we get is a time of when we can anticipate power going back on.
Thank you. Why don't we jump to panel 3, utility partner perspectives on recent events. And we'll start with Mr. Hannigan from Holy Cross. You're muted.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and commissioners. Yes, I'm Brian Hannigan, and I'm the president and CEO of Holy Cross Energy. We're an electric cooperative serving approximately 47,000 members, mainly in Garfield, Pitkin, and Eagle counties. As you probably remember, our service territory has been significantly impacted by wildfires in the past, namely the Lake Christine fire in summer 2018, which nearly severed our single transmission line serving the Roaring Fork Valley. So as a result, Holy Cross has been very focused on reducing wildfire risk and building electric system resilience for many years. As described in our publicly available wildfire mitigation plan, first published in 2023, we use advanced technology, industry best practice, and broad collaboration with our local partners to manage wildfire risk in our area as much as reasonably possible. Our wildfire mitigation plan includes many activities common to that plan filed by PSCO with the Commission, namely situational awareness and weather forecasting tools, proactive system maintenance, inspection and repair, and system hardening work, expanded investments in vegetation management combined with data analytics to ensure that the highest risk threats are addressed first, investments in non-expulsion fuses, trip savers, and other mechanisms, other smart devices on both three-phase and single-phase line, enabling the complete elimination of conventional expulsion fuses in high fire risk areas. Fire settings, also known as EPSS, or enhanced power line safety settings, to modify system protection and control settings in order to reduce the potential for ignition under dry and windy conditions. System resilience projects in high fire risk areas, including spacer cable, covered conductor, and targeted undergrounding of overhead line. And finally, coordination with local governments, emergency responders, and critical service providers, such as schools and hospitals, to invest in community energy system projects that build energy resilience. We view a PSPS to be an absolute last resort, conducted only when all other wildfire risk reduction measures have been exhausted, and it is simply no longer safe to continue traditional operation of the electric system. When making that determination as to whether a PSPS is necessary, we take into account the negative impacts of such action on communications, vital local services, emergency response, firefighting needs for water and other resources, and impacts on other critical infrastructures. We expect to update our existing wildfire mitigation plan in 2026 with additional details on our emerging PSPS protocol and related plans, including extensive strategies for frequent and consistent communication, both with our members and with our communities and their leaders, when there is the potential for a PSPS in our service area, including those that might come from a PSPS initiated by Xcel on its transmission system. Now, specific to the questions posed for this information meeting, Holy Cross is a wholesale customer of Xcel. We are a transmission partner of Xcel, and our distribution service territories are intertwined in many locations on the Western Slope. Our engineering and operations teams specifically and regularly coordinate and collaborate on this and other topics of mutual interest. And specifically on the topic of PSPS, each of our teams has learned from and informed the other as we have developed our respective plans and protocols to manage wildfire risk collectively. Most recently, we participated alongside Xcel in the tabletop exercises conducted by the Colorado Utility Wildfire Consortium in early December, which were timely, as it turns out, given the subsequent PSPS events later in the month. We've also conducted our own tabletop exercises in our community to help identify needs for resilience investments and critical infrastructure dependencies that should be addressed prior to any wildfire event, some of which have translated to real projects that are currently underway. Now, while we were not directly affected on the West Slope by the December 2025 PSPS events, we were made aware of the possibility of those events through Xcel's communications via both traditional and social media on the timelines that Mr. Kenny indicated earlier in his presentation. Had the PSPS event been in our area with impacts to Holy Cross, we would have expected additional direct communication and coordination from Xcel consistent with their plan. Holy Cross would very much like to see this communication commitment extended not only to PSPS, but also Xcel's use of EPSS, enhanced power line safety settings, on its transmission system, given that the potential impacts and increased outages from EPSS setting activity to wholesale customers like Holy Cross who receive service on via the Xcel transmission system. As the Commission considers the potential need for rules regarding PSPS, Holy Cross believes that it is valuable and appropriate to include participation by those who take service from PSCO as wholesale customers like ourselves, and we appreciate the opportunity to share our views today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Jan Coleman, United Power.
Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Jan Coleman. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for United Power. And I do want to say thank you, commissioners, and thank you to everyone here today, because I really appreciate the chance to speak on behalf of United Power and to share what we experienced during the December PSPS events. As one of the largest electric cooperatives in Colorado, we serve communities that are growing quickly and are increasingly exposed to wildfire risk. Our members expect us to protect them, and they also expect us to keep the lights on. Both responsibilities matter deeply to us and to the people we serve. I should also note that several of us at United Power listened to Xcel's presentation to legislators last week, and we heard the comments from public officials and community members. And we share many of the concerns raised around improving timely, transparent, and informative communications. But my goal today is just to walk through what we saw, what worked, and what was challenging, and how we can improve the process going forward. We came into December knowing that PSPS was starting to play a larger role in Colorado's wildfire mitigation strategy. We support that direction because wildfire risk is real and utilities have to play a central role in reducing it. But when the events unfolded, we found ourselves responding to information that was sometimes broad, sometimes late, and not always consistent with what was actually happening in the field. We did get an email very late on December 14th flagging that a PSPS was possible. But beyond that, much of the more detailed or urgent information reached us the same way that it reached the general public, through social media or public statements. And that made it really hard to plan ahead, to staff appropriately, and communicate clearly with the communities we serve. Despite these challenges, our internal response moved quickly. Once it was clear the event was happening, we activated our own storm response plan. We increased staffing in our control center, staged crews, contacted our key accounts and emergency partners, and looked at switching options that might soften the impact. Our team responded quickly, and I'm very proud of how they handled a very tough situation. Just a few months before this event, we had participated in a tabletop exercise with Gilpin County, which reinforced how valuable coordinated planning can be. During the December outages, however, we were not included in the regular briefings that Xcel held with some emergency management organizations. And as a distribution utility serving many of the same communities, we believe including cooperatives in these discussions will lead to better outcomes for everyone. Now, there were definitely things that went well. Our internal teams moved fast. Communication within United Power was strong. Once PSPS restrictions were lifted and our transmission line was re-energized, our field crews restored service efficiently and safely. And across the organization, people stepped up to help. But there were also areas where improvements would make a big difference. First and foremost, cooperatives need to be recognized as true utility partners, not just another part of the general public. We rely on timely, detailed information to keep our own system safe, and we should be included on OEM calls, kept in the loop on critical updates, and invited to participate in after-action reviews and working groups so that we can all learn and improve together. We also need more timely and specific notice. When information comes late or in broad strokes, it limits how well we can position crews, staff our control centers, and communicate with our members as conditions develop. Shifting timelines made it challenging to message member expectations. When the information changes frequently or doesn't match what's happening in the field, our members lose confidence in what we're telling them, even when we're doing our best with what we have. Clear, standardized communication protocols would go a long way. If utilities are all speaking the same language and using the same process, it reduces confusion and helps us deliver more consistent information across jurisdictions. And finally, transmission level outages created major visibility challenges. The transmission outage event we dealt with in our mountain territory was not officially a PSPS, although we were told several times that it would be, and then again it wouldn't be. When those lines go down, we also have to send crews out to physically patrol long stretches of system that would not have experienced an outage otherwise, before we can safely restore the service. And that slows everything down. None of these challenges reflect a lack of effort by anyone involved. They simply show that the system is evolving and that coordination needs to evolve with it. Looking ahead, we believe Colorado can absolutely lead the way in how PSPS is implemented. And to get there, we have a few things we think would help. Bring cooperatives fully into the communication and coordination process. Give utilities earlier and more specific notifications. Create shared communication standards and expectations. Include cooperatives in joint tabletop exercises with Xcel, the PUC, OEMs, and local governments. Improve technical data sharing so that each utility can model potential impacts ahead of time. And be thoughtful about how transmission level PSPX actions or even transmission level wildfire settings are used, because they can significantly affect reliability and situational awareness. And in closing, United Power is committed to being a constructive partner in Colorado's wildfire mitigation efforts. We understand the need for tools like PSPS, and we want to make sure that these tools are applied in ways that keep people safe while also maintaining the trust and reliability of our communities and which they depend on. With clearer communication, stronger coordination, and shared expectations, I believe Colorado can build an approach to PSPS that other states will look to as a model. So thank you for your time today, and thank you for your commitment to getting this right for all of our communities.
Thank you. Appreciate you joining us. I guess I was thinking maybe we just go back to questions for everybody, or do you guys have specific questions for the utilities, Commissioner Plant preferences?
Yeah, no, we can go back to everybody if you want.
Commissioner Gilman, do you have questions for the utilities, or should we go back to everybody in our last 20 or 30 minutes here?
I just have one for Ms. Coleman before we go more general, if that works.
Yeah.
Thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it. Ms. Coleman, I just wanted to understand kind of the impacts that you all faced. It sounds like there was a transmission outage. I'm not clear. Was that a PSPS that then affected your customers? So that was an actual.
It was a wildfire setting. So the sensitivity settings that were set up for events was a wildfire setting. It was communicated early on that we would have a PSPS. Then we were told no, it wouldn't. Then we were told maybe, and then we were told no, it wouldn't again. And so the event that happened was related to wildfire settings in particular. And because our mountain territory is a radial feed from a 115 kV line directly from Xcel only, it impacted our entire mountain territory.
Okay. Thanks for that info. And then also just wanted to understand among the other communities that you serve that where you may coexist with Xcel as a provider, just trying to understand kind of what the impacts were, especially to you and your system in terms of kind of customer confusion, what's on, what's off, what critical infrastructure is where. I don't know, just help me understand maybe briefly a little better picture of kind of what that looks like, and how that played out.
Yeah, and I think you'll recall that others earlier today talked about how the communication was very broad because nobody knows exactly where the system is going to be impacted based on the wind itself. And so we went from the very broad communication as it started to narrow down over the time. We updated our communication channels similarly to how Xcel did. The challenge we ran into is we weren't getting any additional information than what the general public got. So we got press releases, we got a few emails, but we didn't get specifics around our system. So what we did in order to manage it was looked at every substation that was touched by Xcel Energy because none of the other utilities that we buy power from on transmission actually said they were going to implement a PSPS. So we were only impacted by Xcel for this communication. And then we looked at switching options. So at the beginning, we thought most of our system was in the PSPS protocol. As we got closer to the event, that reduced down. But we had to be prepared regardless. So we made sure that our switching orders were ready to go in case we needed to reevaluate how we brought power to our members.
Okay, got it. So you were assuming at least the potential for any substation you had fed by Xcel would likely or possibly go off as part of that. And then were those areas included in the original mapping?
In the original mapping, yes. But as we got closer to the event, we did get communication that most of our territory was outside of the PSPS. And then as the event got closer, the confusion really stayed around the mountain area territory. In fact, when we lost power there, we actually thought that that transmission line was still part of the PSPS because that communication was lacking. Once we realized it was from the wildfire settings, it made a lot more sense to us about what had happened, but it took a while for us to get that information.
Okay.
Commissioner, if I can jump in as
yeah.
well, we've had some instances where even the use of the enhanced power line settings, the safety settings, have led to trips on the transmission side, which have had inadvertent effects on the distribution customers. And some of those impacts for us were rather large because of the way that we had our systems switched around to be served preferentially on one or more substations as we might have been doing work on another feeder. And so we were taking load off that feeder to be served by another substation that was impacted. So there's a lot of unintended consequences that can sometimes come about if there's not that coordination between the transmission provider and the distribution provider. And so I think that communication element that my colleague from United Power, Mr. Coleman, brought forward is absolutely critical, and something that I would argue extends even to the use of these protection settings that are more sensitive and more likely to create outages.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all. Sorry, Chair. Thanks for allowing that follow-up.
No, no worries. Thank you. I guess I have a question for the group, and maybe start with Mr. Chard or Mr. Silberman. I mean, the PUC is focused on trying to do a rulemaking, and just curious, and to Mr. Kenny's points, there may be limits to how much we want to do in rules, and some of this is going to have to wait to the 2027 wildfire mitigation plan filing. But just curious if your advice would be for the PUC to stick narrowly to implementing our rules and our own agenda, or do you see us having a broader, useful convening function? So just curious if you have any advice, Mr. Silberman. I know Mr. Chard talked about an implementation task force or something, and you talked about an existing work group. So does the group have any advice for what the best role for the PUC is? Stick tightly as possible to the rules, or is there a broader convening role?
I appreciate the question. I think it's important to check with the 911 PUC staff to identify if what you guys are trying to accomplish is overlapping with any already other efforts in the 911 community, so that we don't, create duplicate work. Our internal small working group has been specifically focused on battery backup for 911 landline technology.
So not the broader communication issues.
Not the broader communication. That is correct.
Ms. Taya?
Thank you. I do want to note there are some ongoing efforts currently at the legislature that actually we as CCLP are bringing forward. We are bringing forward a bill that has yet to be introduced. It will be a late bill by Representative Soper and Representative Velasco. It is called the Robin Alert Policy Outline. And so we are asking for all utility energy companies that are consumer facing to provide a minimum framework for consumers to establish a uniform for outages and notification systems. So similar to what we've discussed earlier today, around like an Amber Alert or anything like that, we did a lot of research the last year and a half here at CCLP around this, and have found that while we want to do an Amber Alert, of course, that costs a lot of money, and we don't have money right now to give at the state level. So something we considered was having a consumer-focused statewide process for utilities, including Xcel and cooperatives and municipality utilities, to do so that way all consumers are able to get the same notification regardless of which region they live in Colorado. I'm always happy to discuss more about it too. I'm also happy to leave my email in the chat if people want to outreach and have a more further one-on-one discussion. But that is coming.
That'd be great. Mr. Chard, if you're there and have any comments, and then I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Kenny. Mr. Chard.
I'm sorry, I was on another LEPC call. I'm doing two things at once right now. Is this a final comment piece?
Yeah.
Yeah, the final comment I did receive a text from Nate. He's keeping me informed here. As far as recommendations go moving forward with the working group, I'd like to see if there's a way to maybe get that done before any rulemaking occurs. I think there could be some definite outputs of that could benefit the PUC rulemaking process.
Mr. Kenny, any advice? Should we be sticking to our knitting? Do we have a broader convening role that would be useful here? Do you want to get in, Mr. Whittington, before Mr. Kenny answers?
Yes, please. Let Mr. Whittington go first.
I would second what Mike said about getting kind of that overarching approach put together first. I would also highly recommend that before this group or any other legislative body takes a role in alerting, that there is conversation and coordination with the emergency managers. The last thing we want to do is alert to where when we actually need to send an emergency alert, it's tone deaf. We've got to be very cognizant about that. So I would appreciate the conversation beforehand. As the president of the State Association for Emergency Management, I think it's vital that anything that comes out of the PUC or legislative body has that connection back to the emergency managers. Thank you.
Mr. Kenny, anywhere you'd like to go?
Well, I'd say two things. Well, first of all, I just appreciate the feedback from everybody who's taken the last several hours to participate, and please know that we do take this feedback in. I was reminded that we've had about 20 some odd different after action reviews since the December event. We've got some additional ones that are planned, and so we welcome feedback, and it is indeed a gift, and we do incorporate it to the greatest extent possible. So there's work underway. I think Director Chard's suggestion of a working group is one that's well taken. I would just counsel the commission to be careful and cautious not to create additional process for process's sake that's going to be duplicative of things that are already in the works. And I would also just be mindful, and I would say this to the commission, I say this to the legislature as well, is that you want to be very mindful of any unintended consequences of a rule that you might enact. You don't want something that's going to be overly prescriptive, and you don't want to do something that's going to create perverse incentives or disincentives to act. And you don't want to create something that's going to create a situation where people are behaving in an unsafe condition. So just be mindful of unintended consequences of any rule that you enact. The last thing I would say is that please know that we do this again as a public safety measure, and full stop. If we have opportunities to improve on our communications, please know it's not for lack of care. And so we will take that feedback and we'll incorporate it to the greatest extent possible. And just again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you for participating. Commissioner Plant, anywhere you'd like to go?
I don't think I have any further questions. Thanks.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, maybe just a question on where we're at, kind of from all the different, there's a lot of people here, but anyone who wants to chime in, where we are on the critical facilities piece of this, in terms of identification and thinking we have thorough identification or are not there yet. If not, what is the timeline for that? Then among that, I don't know if it's 82,000, but there will be a lot of facilities on the list. So to what degree do we understand prioritization as part of the list, not just a laundry list, but prioritization, and then the actual status of backup versus prioritization of re-energization, and then, how we get better restoration efforts to those. So just trying to understand like the full picture of where we're at on kind of fulfilling, like a better vision for identification first, but then real understanding and coordination with these critical facilities.
I'm going to let Andrew jump in just real quick, though. Let me just to make a point. And Andrew's going to get into the details and specifics of what's on that list. I think once we have a critical customer list, then the question becomes what additional service do you get by virtue of that? And I think you were talking about prioritization of restoration versus backup generation versus advanced communication. I think all of that flows from whether you are or are not on that critical customer list. But I think just to be clear, we've had a process in place that's been ongoing for at least the last 12 months, as far as I'm aware, of where we've been gathering the information about what each county considers to be its critical infrastructure and critical customer list. And then we've helped to cull that down to a more realistic list. So with that, I'll let Andrew jump in to get into more detail about that.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. First of all, based on some of the commissioner ruling, we are providing bi-monthly updates in regards to kind of where the status is to the commission on the actual list that we're conjuring here today, but to everything that Robert just mentioned, we did start with a broader approach in regards to what a defined critical facility is, and we've been working with our local OEMs around the state to get this in a more refined approach. One thing that we've learned by serving numerous different counties from different economic or rural stature is that it's not all created equally. We worked really closely with some of our counties in the San Luis Valley area where they would call a dollar store a critical facility just because it's one of the food distribution centers that they have in a 60-mile area. So they would want to bring that more forward. I know that my team has been working very closely with, Director Shard and Mr. Whittington and a number of other folks around the state to just really understand what we see from a critical facility perspective, but also what they understand because they are the subject matter experts in the room. We really defer to our emergency management partners on the external side to understand what those community impacts look like. It is, to the other point that I would just like to make is through this working process is the unintended consequences of what we tend to or define as a critical facility. We want to make sure that they get up-to-date information and get that first round of communication. So if, in a blue sky scenario, we're able to notify those critical facilities 72 hours in advance, that gives them the opportunity to activate their preparedness responses, and we're continuing to adapt on how we do that. We've, moved forward the public safety partner portal. I know that's been referenced here a number of times. That's an online GIS mapping system where we give our full assets to folks that have signed an NDA just from a proprietary information perspective so that we can be as transparent as possible. Additionally to that, we're open to feedback. We want to make sure that this is not a one size fits all because all of our communities are so different in nature. And we want to make sure that we have, really good working relationships on how we capture this. We don't want to, identify golf courses, but we want to make sure that we have intricate, ways of identifying where we connect with other utility partners so that they have hyper awareness of when we're potentially looking at a PSPS. Also, our telecommunications efforts and then our hospitals and things of that nature. So we've made significant progress over the last 12 months. And I would suspect when we look 12 months here into the future, we're going to be substantially further along this journey as we keep working with all of our OEMs and our other partners here around the state.
Mr. Chard?
If I could just kind of add on to that, first I have a little short story to talk about critical infrastructure around this, but it also feeds into Commissioner Gilman's question on resources. One is we had Golden West, it made it in the newspaper, became well known. This was a critical facility, tier 1 for us, but went to tier 2 because it had a generator. The folks load tested it ahead of time. They got the information to them. The thing ran perfectly. They were thinking they were going to go into the PSPS, great, and then they got in the PSPS and the generator failed. Then we had now a long-term care center basically going into crisis. The coordination we had and the ability to get into their operations center was paramount because then Xcel was able to execute emergency restoration to that. And just as the thing was about ready to go off the cliff in heroic fashion and Hollywood fashion, Xcel, boom, lights come on, everyone's cheering and clapping inside the facility, and they're feeling very grateful about that. So that kind of thing's great. But I think what it also highlights, though, and Gil, you were talking about resources, the number of crews that are on lines. It just elevated to me is that when I was an incident commander out in the field in another job, I always had something left over in my staging area so that I could contribute it or add those resources quickly into anything that would be like a mayday or an identified emergency. So I'd be curious, though, if I was a commissioner, I'd want to know, like, is there enough resources, not just to do the restoration, but also pick up those critical requests? Because even though we do all this critical infrastructure work, this is where we're going to land the plane, and we identify everything, it still means we're going to have these little escapes that are going to come outside of our planned efforts, and we're going to find these critical facilities are going to find themselves needing immediate attention. If the resources are strapped, then we're having to pull resources off of what we would say, well, that's just normal ops. But for people on that feeder line, that's critical to them because now it's delaying it because you're having to revert back over to emergency response. So I think that sort of transparency as we move forward in the critical infrastructure side is what I've learned from this last one. It'd be important to make sure that that's part of that incident command operations plan that we don't have vision to. I would want to know that my county has those emergency assets that are there so that I know I can lean into Xcel and know that they're going to be able to respond quickly in both spaces, maintain their operational restoration, but be able to get to the emergency requests that are going to come up that I guarantee will come up on everything of size and scale that we've encountered.
Mr. Salazar.
I was just going to thank Mike for those comments. I agree completely. And one thing to add just on the last few events that we've had, the coordination and the OEMs, and I know we have a lot to improve on and we're committed to that, but having that call and that touch point with Mike and all of his colleagues across the state has been fantastic. It's really helped us a lot. So I look forward to partnering and getting even better.
Thank you. I guess I'll end with one question for you, Mr. Kenny. Yeah, at least personally, I hear you that this is early stage and we got to be careful about what we put in rules and not being overly prescriptive. Any guidance for the role the commission can take? Further thoughts, guidance as we move this forward?
I would say what I've seen from looking around the country, some type of periodic updates to the wildfire mitigation plan, some type of periodic reporting on how we're progressing against the plan. I think there's opportunities to remain in your oversight role through those types of periodic updates. I think that's an appropriate role. And I don't want to also, you asked more specifically, Chairman Blank, about the power to convene. I think that actually is, and you and I've talked about this before, I think that is exactly a skill set that is well within the commission's wheelhouse, is to bring a variety of different stakeholders together. So I don't want to rule that out either. I think, you might wait until you see what's actually already underway, but I do think there is a role in a power of convening that the commission also has as well.
And do you have any advice about how to go about doing that?
Well, again, I think this has been, I think, from my perspective, very constructive. I don't know if there's a regular cadence by which you would want to do something like a commissioner information meeting to see how things are progressing, to see perhaps, I'm thinking off the top of my head, we talked about convening the implementation working group. Is there an opportunity for the commission, after that has been convened, after the implementation working group is working, to be updated on what progress has been made against the things that we've committed to? I think there's an opportunity there.
Who's convening that group? Are you convening that, Mr. Chard? Or are you looking for us to convene that? Is Xcel convening that? What role do you see the commission playing in doing that? You want to see us write up the concerns we've heard here and in the public comment and try and use that as a starting point? What role do you see the commission playing, Mr. Chard?
I'll also rely on my peer group here to correct me if I'm wrong here, but the vision I had would be is we're getting with Xcel. I think that's something we can work with our emergency management agency. I see a couple of different potential working groups coming out of this, so it doesn't get too large, too gangly with it. Some areas of effort, one maybe being more on the community side, one being more on the operational side. Like I said earlier, I think there's very two distinct fields there that by separating those lines of effort out, you can achieve things more efficiently. I see then the PUC, I do like what Mr. Kenny is saying. I think that sort of check-in piece, without having deadlines, without having some sort of lack of a better term, policy type group that you're reporting to that comes back and says, here's what we're doing, here's the progress we're making. And maybe also here's the problems we're having and we're needing help with clearing log jams, or knowing if we're getting some mission creep in that would be what I would look for the PUC to help, kind of define a little bit. But I think from a local level pulling it together, usually everything kind of happens. I wish the state would maybe take more of that role. I don't know if they would be willing to, but with some coordination in the region.
We are the state.
Well, I'm referring to like DHSEM
Yeah.
in that regard. And I think there's been some dilution of that role. I don't know whether that's because they haven't been tasked with it or they're trying to defer to locals to not, interfere with our processes. But I think there might be an opportunity there for them to take more of a convening oversight and facilitation part of it because it is regional. But if not, we will do what we do. We will pull together the emergency managers in the North Central region, at least in the area that we have, and we're doing other projects that are along the Front Range, and we will pull this together because it's that important to our communities, our public safety, that we as emergency managers need to be at the forefront of the mantle of making sure that this process gets started and it's managed efficiently, however that manifests. So you have my commitment to help getting that off the ground if we can't find something from the state to launch it.
So it's less go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to say it's less a convening role and more like put some structure to it, lay out a timeline and some reporting back, but maybe less convening role. But Mr. Kenny?
I was going to say, I think to Director Chard's point, and to your point, yes, the PUC is the state, but I think that this is also transcends just public utilities. I mean, you're really talking about a climate-driven emergency preparedness type of event that we are a component of preventing and mitigating that. County OEMs have a role to play in protecting their own citizenry. Even the local governments have a role to play. And so I think Director Chard's, I'm not trying to speak for you, but I think part of his point is that this transcends just the utilities. There's a role for all of us to play in all this. And, we haven't talked about the role of the federal government in forest management, for instance. So I say all that to say is that, yes, I think there is a role for the PUC. And we also at the same time need to recognize that this transcends just the utilities.
Fair enough. Or in our last few minutes, Ms. Coleman, really briefly, then Mr. James, and then we're going to wrap up.
I just want to say, I think we have the right people on the call to make sure that distribution co-ops are included in some of these discussions because we are critical infrastructure partners. And I think we need to be at the table for these conversations.
Mr. James, I think you're maybe the perfect person to have the last word.
Thank you, I think. To reply to Mr. Chard, we agree, or I agree, Chris Sorensen agrees that we probably need to take a more active role in coordinating regionally to get those aspects from all around the state versus taking that step back role that we typically have been. Just to really, that way it gives all the regions time to, or a place, a venue to start to hash things out. Then we would be there to also hear, know, and act, and then assist where needed. So I think Chris Sorensen will be reaching out to you, Mr. Chard, to kind of like get some lay of the land of what you're looking at and what he's got going on in his brain, and we can start pushing forward.
Well, I just want to thank you all for a provocative, thoughtful, constructive gathering. This has been enormously helpful, and to Mr. Kenny's point, probably way beyond just the regulatory system and the public utilities. So really heartfelt thanks for everybody working together. Commissioner Plant, final thoughts in the last minute?
No, just thank everybody for participating and for making recommendations to us in the future on what these rules might look like, and so we can incorporate them into the process. So appreciate it.
Commissioner Gelman.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate everyone's input, and I think we've got our work cut out for us to make sure that we move this forward in the right way and really scope it appropriately. It seems there's a lot of overlap with the PSPS as with normal outages in terms of communication, notification, restoration, and so trying to figure out the right scope to move this forward will be very important. But really appreciate all of your input, as well as especially all of the public servants on the calls trying to keep things moving along, especially in the worst of circumstances, along with your first responders in your communities. Really appreciate all the work y'all are doing to make this work. So thank you very much, not just for your input today, but for everything you've been doing along the way to help your communities out as we navigate this.
Thanks again, everybody. Thanks to the company for sticking with us throughout the whole time period, and for leading us forward, everybody. With that, we're adjourned. More to come. Thanks all.
Thank you.